right. Share my screen. Okay. So, welcome everyone to our third day of Cohort 26 virtual training. I'm glad to see so many people have made it today. Please remember that if you have not watched the first two trainings, that you do need to go in and make sure you do that as soon as possible. We are checking that, and we are making note of those who signed into the training and signed out of the trainings. That is kind of our measure to make sure that you are watching the whole thing. So for today, if you want to go ahead and sign into today's training, I'll go ahead and put this link. If you have your phone and want to scan the QR code, please go ahead and do so. Otherwise, I'll put the link in the chat if I can find the chat. Hold on just a second. Here we go. All right. So I've put the link in the chat. And while I go over this first part, if you'll just go ahead and get signed in, I know that takes you guys a few minutes to do that. Please make sure that when you're signing in, when it asks you for LEA name or CBO name, it's asking you for the subgrantee. So if you're Colbert County, then you would put Colbert County. That is the person, that's a subgrantee. They may have several different sites underneath that county. Or if you're a CBO, if you're Boys and Girls Club of North Alabama, then you would put that as a subgrantee. And then when it asks you for the site name, you would put the name of your actual 21st Century site there. So that has seemed to have been a little bit of confusion on the signing in and not signing out in the past two workshops or past two trainings. And so if you'll just please do it that way, it makes it less confusing. You shouldn't be putting a person's name for LEA or CBO or a person's name for the site name. It should be the 21st Century site's name and either the LEA's name that your grant is under or the CBO's name that the grant is under. I'm sure that all of you have a lot of questions in your mind today about the future of 21st Century funding. So I just wanted to start us off today by talking about that before we go any further. As you know, we're all wondering what's going to happen with 21st Century. We did get an email. Can't remember if it came in on July 1st or the evening before July 1st, but we got an email from the federal government stating that for now, they were not going to be dropping funds on July 1st like they normally do for Title 4B and several other title programs as well. The email basically just said that administration is reviewing the programs and deciding how they want to move forward with those programs. And until they make that decision, they will not be dropping funds. So right now, we're all kind of in limbo. As far as knowing what is going to happen with 21st Century funding for FY26. Now, the federal government calls it FY25, but we at the state would call it the fiscal year 26. So that can get really confusing sometimes. So if you saw that email, if someone forwarded you that email from the feds and it said something about FY25 funds not dropping on July 1st, they're really referring to our FY26 funds. We've already been allocated FY25 funds, what we call FY25. And right now we're still actually spending out some FY24 funds as well. And those expire on September 30th of this year. The good news is that while we're kind of in this waiting period, we can continue doing the work that we plan to do until we know more, because we do have an extensive amount of extra funding right now. Just over the years, sites, I'm not exactly sure. I've only been with the program for a year now, but over the past several years, I think carryover money has just kind of built up, or maybe not all the funds were given to sub-grantees like they could have been. But anyway, a good amount of funds accumulated over the past several years. And so we actually have quite a bit of FY24 funding that we're trying to get spent out right now. And we have not yet touched FY25 funding. Now, I did spend quite an extensive period of time yesterday going through all of our funding and trying to make sure that we will have enough money to carry us over the year. And I'm still not positive that we'll have completely enough to carry everyone through the entire year, but we definitely should be fine to get us started for the year and get us most of the way through the year. And it really just depends on the current cohorts and whether they spend out all their funds or not. They typically do not tend to do that. There's several sites that we have right now that haven't spent a single penny of their money yet from this past year. So they haven't submitted any of their ES2s, which we hopefully will get to today talking about. And so if you're one of those sites, if you're a cohort 16 site that also got the 26 grant and you haven't submitted your expenditures, please get those in. It's really, really hard to plan for the future when there's a huge amount of money that's kind of sitting there in limbo and hasn't been spent by the sites. Just because people haven't been turning in their ES2s like they're supposed to. So, but again, for now, we have been told by our administrators, or I've been told by my administrator, that we're just going to continue the course as planned until we're told otherwise. And so if you already have plans to go to Mega, if you've already paying for people, to come to that training, you will be reimbursed. If you want to go ahead and start hiring people for the new year, you're welcome to do that. If you want to go ahead and start putting out informational materials about the upcoming year for students, you can do that. Again, I feel like we will have enough funding to at least get all the awardees through a year, but it's still kind of a little bit up in the air. It depends on how much money is spent by our current cohorts for this year. So I'm looking at ways to try to mitigate that a little bit and try to get that sped up. But that, we won't talk about that right this second because that's just still kind of in the works. So now, as far as what happens after this year, we just don't know yet. We are still waiting on further information from the federal government. Worst case scenario would be that they would defund our program. But we can at least still get through the 1 year. So just for now, just be patient. Fingers crossed that things will be, that things will continue as normal, and just stay with the course and continue to plan for the upcoming school year. We will make sure that you don't have to worry about not being reimbursed for expenses. Definitely have enough money to get us through like the first half of the year for sure, probably the entire year. Again, I'm just not absolutely positive until we see what kind of expenditures we have for this current year. All right. Does anyone have any questions about that before I move forward with today's training? You're welcome to put it in the chat if anyone has any questions. All right, I don't see anything popping up, but if you're still typing and you have a question, just go ahead and I will stop and address your questions as they come up. All right, so as you can see, hopefully you've all had time to sign in by now, and we're just going to continue our conversation that we left off with last time, speaking about the different types of positions that you may have at your 21st century site. And so we had talked about administrative positions last time, and now we are going to start discussing your non-administrative positions that you can have at your site. And these would be your staff members who work directly with students, okay? None of these are mandatory. Well, to a certain extent, they might be. You do need to have teachers, right? But for example, you do not have to have a lead teacher, but you can have a lead teacher if you choose to do so. If you choose to have a lead teacher, that person should provide instruction to students and only have administrative duties in the absence of a site coordinator. So that is a nice thing about having a lead teacher. They can it's almost like having an assistant principal. They can step into that administrative duty if the site coordinator can't be there that day. It is recommended that the lead teacher be a certified teacher and meet regularly with school day teachers on behalf of program alignment. So this could be that person that has to fill in as that collaboration liaison that we talked about in our last training. It doesn't have to be, but it could be that person. The lead teacher should analyze all program data and use the RFA application to plan lesson plans, ensuring that all activities align with school day academics, ESSA, SMART goals, and objectives. Okay. So one of the things that we plan to do with you guys at Mega is go through your RFAs to make sure that everyone understands what they said in their application they would be doing with their students. And so we will spend time on that there. But that lead teacher really needs to be making sure that all the lessons that are taking place within the 21st century program are aligned with whatever is going on during the school day, at least if it's an after school program, and that they are creating proper lesson plans and that sort of thing. So we will talk about lesson plans and what the expectation is for that. Then you can have just a regular teacher. Of course, this is a person who's responsible for primary delivery of instruction. This would be, you would want a actual teacher to provide instruction if you're providing any kind of instruction that's academic. You would want that to be done by an actual teacher. Part of their delivery of instruction would include looking at evidence-based research and making decisions on what is going to be taught based on that. They could be doing project-based learning, which I highly recommend. I think that, and we've discussed this with our current cohorts, that sometimes a really great way to address what needs to be done during the school day, but also have fun activities, is to think about running your after school program as more of a project-based learning situation so that you are providing enrichment activities and educational activities that all kind of are tied to a certain theme and a certain project that you're working on. You could also, of course, included in this would be your enrichment lesson plans and tracking the progress of each student's growth with GEPRA. We are going to talk more about GEPRA data, but probably not going to get to that today. But everybody needs to be aware of what that is, because that is the data that we have to report to the federal government. And it's what they use to justify the continued funding of 21st century. That's what GEPRA is for. All right. You can also have teacher assistants. The teacher assistant would assist with the primary delivery of instruction and the role of the primary teacher. Usually you would want your teaching assistants to be retired teachers, paraprofessionals, auxiliary teachers. They usually are going to be someone who falls within the guidelines of those who are no longer certified. So typically your teachers are going to be certified staff. Your teacher assistant they can be certified, but they may no longer be a certified person or do not meet the qualifications of being a certified teacher. However, they are qualified enough to help and assist with that delivery of instruction. You can also have student assistants. Usually these are high school or college students whose job it is to assist teachers and staff with tasks outside of those of delivering academic instruction. Please note that if you do hire and you can pay these students, if you do hire student assistants, they cannot be alone with students, and they would not be counted as part of your student-teacher ratio. But yes, you can pay them. You can pay them, of course, minimum wage or maybe even a little bit more to help with that program. So it's really great when we see a student that goes through the 21st Century program and then eventually becomes a student assistant when they get to high school to help out with the younger grades. That's always a really great thing to see. All right, then a volunteer. You can always have volunteers. A volunteer is defined as any person who provides a service for the 21st Century program and is not compensated for that service. They might provide tutoring, art, dance, life skills, mentoring. We have lots of 21st Century programs that have mentoring programs with local churches and things like that that come in and help with their students. To be a volunteer, well, actually, you can be a volunteer even at the college age. We do have, I think we've mentioned before, some relationships with some colleges where they send students to volunteer to help tutor. But in order to work with students independently, volunteers must be 21 years of age and they must have that current fingerprinted background check on file with the subgrantee. Okay. If I go back to the student assistant, let me just point something out. If the student is in high school, they don't have to have that fingerprinted background check. But if they are college students, if they've already graduated from high school, they do need to have that background check unless it's one of those situations like we talked about last time with Alice Powell's, where there is a contract in place or a memorandum of understanding in place that where everybody is absolutely certain that that student assistant or that college student will never be left alone on their own with the students. But typically, if they're an adult, they've graduated from high school, and if they're ever going to be alone or have the opportunity to be alone with students, then they need to have that fingerprinted background check. Okay. So that takes care of different types of employees that you can have at your site. I know all of you have already, that your applications have been written, but it is not too late to make changes. If you saw one of these things and then you did not put that in your original application, you can, hire additional staff. I believe that the ALSDE specialists have been sending back your applications to you and letting you know, and they may not have gotten to everybody's yet, but some of you are starting to get some feedback on your applications and letting you know some things that might need to be changed or updated. And if you feel like you want to add staff to your application, it is not too late to do so. Even if you have already resubmitted it and it's been approved, you can always do a budget revision and add staffing as needed. So if you get a couple of months into the program and realize that you would love to hire some student assistants or teacher assistants, then you can always do a revision and add that to your application. You would just have to resubmit it through EGAP. And, it's usually pretty quickly can get approved and you can hire that additional staff. Okay, so speaking of EGAP, let's start talking about some fiscal matters. So please keep in mind that when you make purchases for your 21st Century program, goals, objectives, and activities should be driving your purchase decision, not the other way around. So, for example, you shouldn't say, it shouldn't be a matter of, oh, wow, there's this really cool program out there. There are interactive software out there. I think that one big one right now that a lot of people are wanting to get is the Lou interactive system. It's like $40,000. Is it allowable? Yes, it is. But should you say, oh, that's really cool, let's buy it, and then plan our activities and goals around having that system? No. What should happen is you plan your goals, objectives, and activities, and then if that Lou interactive system is something that will be beneficial to meet those goals and objectives and get those activities done, then you would purchase that Lou system. Same thing, I think I mentioned this already about field trips. You shouldn't be thinking, oh, it would be really cool to take a field trip to wherever, and then try to plan lessons around a field trip you want to take. It should be, what field trips can we take that would enhance what we've been learning in our 21st century program? So where could we go where kids could actually see this topic in real life and experience it in real life? So that's really the way it should be. That's the way your purchase decisions should be driven. Also remember that just because it's allowable doesn't mean it's prudent or approvable. So we are supposed to look at whether things are reasonable and necessary, okay? So all spending has to follow state and federal laws, including specific financial rules, and they have to be reasonable and necessary and follow the rules and limits set by those regulations. They have to be managed efficiently and be recorded properly using those standard accounting principles. So when you decide you want to purchase something, really you need to think about, is this reasonable and necessary? Yes, I could buy this $40,000 piece of equipment, but is there a less expensive way that I can teach the exact same, academic goals, the exact same materials, academic materials? Is it necessary to buy that in order for your program to be successful? Now, lately we've been kind of pushing our sites to buy some more expensive things just because we needed to spend up that money. From FY24, we definitely didn't want to send it back. But typically that would not necessarily be something that we would highly encourage unless it was something that was needed. Is it a need of your program? Think about the needs of your students. Yes, you do want to provide them with enrichment activities. You want to make sure that you're purchasing things that are going to make your program fun and make kids want to come to your program, but try to think about the most reasonable way to do that when you can, okay? All right. So let's talk about unallowable costs. Subgrantees can't use 21st century funds for unauthorized activities. It says here see RFA for details. Sorry about that. I should have put some unallowable activities in here. So give me just 1 second and I'm going to pull up in the RFA where it speaks about that and mention some of the things that are not allowable with 21st century. Sorry about that. So this is in page 19 of the RFA if you happen to have it with you. So some unauthorized activities would be activities that occur during normal school hours. It does say in the RFA that the purchase of food, including snacks, is not allowable unless it's part of a approved cooking class or cooking demonstration or health or nutrition lesson. But we do know now, we've talked about already, there are certain circumstances where food may be allowable during the summer programs. I'm not going to go back to that again, but if you haven't watched the first couple of sessions, please make sure you go back and do that so that you'll know when food would be allowable. You cannot cover cost of field trips whose sole or primary purpose is entertainment. This would be amusement parks, skating rinks, jump parks, things like that. If you ask to go to a place like that, please make absolutely sure that you have a very, very solid lesson plan that goes with it, where your kids are doing activities leading up to that field trip. They're doing something on the field trip and they're coming back and producing some sort of product after the field trip that you will either keep samples of or take pictures of, because I know that there's other states that have been cited for allowing 21st century sites to go on field trips to amusement parks or skating rinks or things like that. But I didn't want to say absolutely not, because I know that for some of you, this may be the children's only chance to go to a place like that, but we have to be able to back up that what we're doing is educational, and we need to be able to back it up with a very solid lesson plan. So please be very careful about that and don't ask to go to places that are primarily for entertainment unless you really truly do plan to make it an educational experience, and that unless you're willing to provide the evidence that it was an educational experience. If I get in trouble for allowing something like that, then it will be completely done away with. We will not do anything. We will not allow any kind of activities to places where the primary purpose is entertainment. All right, you can't provide gift cards, gift certificates, or any other kind of monetary incentives for students. Now you can do, which is new, this is new, new federal guidelines said that you can do some small incentives for students, but they can't be monetary. So for example, you could have a reading program, and then once a child reads a certain number of books or a certain number of hours, you could give them a book that they could take home and keep. That would be an acceptable item. You could buy the little, ribbons or stickers or things like that. Those are acceptable items now. Cannot purchase any kind of gift card or any kind of gift certificate or monetary incentives. Now, you can get those donated from your community and give them to kids that way, but you can't use 21st Century funds to purchase any kind of gift card, gift certificate, or monetary incentive. You can't provide incentives for staff, such as bonuses, awards. You can't do a luncheon or anything like that for staff. You can't purchase anything that would be considered religious or support religious activities. So even if you're an FBO, which is a faith-based organization, anything you purchase with 21st Century funds does not need to be religious materials. So like Becca books, you wouldn't be able to purchase that with 21st Century funds. You would just need to stick to your regular instruction and leave religion out of it if it's purchased with 21st Century funds. You can't cover costs associated with any kind of marketing activities, but that does not include recruitment of student participants. So you can spend money to recruit students. So for example, if you wanted to put out a newsletter, something of that nature, you could spend money on that. But no other marketing activities, nothing like, you can't buy like shirts with your program name on it to give away, or pins with your name on it, or anything like that. That kind of marketing thing is not allowed. Where you would like purchase, what I'm talking about, like swag. You couldn't purchase like swag materials to give out with your logo or something like that on it. That would not be allowable. You cannot cover costs associated with any kind of grant writing or fundraising activities. So you can do a fundraiser. It's just if that involves any kind of cost, that cannot be purchased with 21st Century funds. Grant writing, if you're wanting to hire someone to write your RFA for the next grant, you would have to do that with funds other than 21st Century. You cannot use 21st Century funds for that. You cannot subgrant to another program. So in other words, you cannot hire somebody to run your program for you. You can't purchase buses or vehicles. You can't purchase, construct, or renovate a building. So that's why a lot of times if you do something like buy that Lou interactive system, we ask that you get the mobile version and not the one that has to be installed, because you're not allowed to use 21st Century funds to like run wiring to the ceiling or make any kind of change to the building. And it needs to be easily removed and be able to be moved to another site in case your program has to be shut down. So you can't, I think in the past, renovating like a parking lot was put into some materials that is not allowed with 21st Century funds. So no major like construction or anything like, or even minor construction to a building can be done. And then no purchase of clothing. And I think we've actually covered these before in one of the previous trainings now that I'm going through them. Because I remember talking about, clothing for students. You can purchase t-shirts for field trips, but they do need to have the 21st Century logo on there, and they're not supposed to be sent home with the kids. They're really supposed to remain property of the program. And in certain circumstances, you may be able to purchase clothing with you need to get approval from ALSDE first. You may be able to purchase some clothing materials if it's a matter of safety and the kids need needs that clothing. So, or need something in order to do the activity. So, for example, let's say that you are going to do like a rollerblading enhancement activity. You could buy skates, you could buy rollerblades, but they would need to remain property of the 21st Century Program and used by kids year after year after year. Yes, you might have to buy different sizes, you know, if kids come in and have different size feet, but they would need to remain property of the 21st Century Program. So just make sure anything like that you get approved ahead of time. Okay, some other things. So moving on, other things back on this slide, no transfers. You can't give funds to another entity to run the project because that's back to the sub-granting. You can't do that. Please note that any leftover money at the end of the grant period will be allocated as carryover. But in your RFA in 26, that this was for past years, but in 26, it does state in the RFA that the ALSDE reserves the right to reduce the funds for the next year, and more than likely that exactly will happen because we just can't continue to let funds build from year to year to year. And really, the goal is to use the funds in the year that they were allocated. And so really, really shouldn't be carrying over huge amounts of funds. Now, if it's smaller amounts, like $20,000 or less, that's fine. It's just when you get into those upper amounts, 30, 50, 60, $100,000 that you're not using, then is a very good chance that your grant the next year will be reduced by that amount instead of just letting it continue to roll over and roll over. Okay. So sorry about the way this slide looks. When I send this out to you guys, I tried to move these over and over again, and it just will not let me move them. It's driving me crazy that they're off center. But I did copy this over from another presentation. So for some reason, it just will not let me touch them. But when you get this presentation, I'm sure it'll be sent out by Erica at the end of the week with her weekly email. But there are some links in the presentation that you can go click on and look at other examples of things that are allowable and not allowable. These links will take you to just various resources where you can continue to kind of look into what is allowable and what's not with 21st century funds. Okay, so next we're going to talk a little bit about procurement. So let's talk first about capitalized equipment. Capitalized equipment is when you're purchasing a single item that one item costs $5,000 or more. That has to be approved. This is with all title programs, including Title I, Title II. Whenever you purchase something that's considered capitalized equipment, it has to be approved by the state. And so there is actually a place in the application for you to put in capitalized equipment, but also you do need to just put it into your budget. And you would use the object code for capitalized equipment, which I can't think of right off the top of my head right this second, but we're going to get to it in a little bit. And then there is actually a form for you to complete to request for approval to purchase this capitalized equipment. So it, for lack of better title, is actually called the request for approval to purchase capitalized equipment form. So it's just basically a simple form for you to tell us what the item is, how much it costs, what the reasoning is behind purchasing that item, how you plan to use it, that sort of thing. It's just like a one-page thing for you to submit. Okay, so please keep in mind though, when you purchase capitalized equipment, it is supposed to meet the following criteria, and this is straight from EDGAR, the federal regulations on procurement. So it is supposed to retain its original shape and appearance with use, so that it needs to be an item that is not going to go bad or be damaged if you use it. So in other words, it doesn't need to be a really large ticket item that's a one-time use thing and then you can't use it anymore. That would not be acceptable, okay? under normal conditions, is expected to serve its intended purpose for longer than 1 year. So typically, we do not allow 21st century sites to make large purchases the last year of their grant. And I think the reason why, I think there was some confusion in past years between capitalized equipment and then large purchases, because you can make a large purchase of multiple items, but if it's something, a single item that costs more than $5,000, it needs to be able to serve its intended purpose for longer than a year. So if your program is not going to last longer than another year, you do not need to you do not need to buy something that would be considered capitalized equipment. If you know, like it, for example, Cohort 16 that is currently about to be over, if they did not get the grant for 26 and they know they're not going to continue to run an after-school program at all, then they would not need to purchase, they would not need to buy anything that would fall under capitalized equipment, because they're not. Oh, thank you, Melissa. Melissa uploaded the capitalized equipment form into the chat. Thank you so much. There's a link to it there. And actually, I'm going to copy that real quick and put it into the PowerPoint so that you guys will have it when this is sent out. I'll just put it down here. Sorry. It's one nice thing about not working in, oh goodness, that's big. All right. Maybe I won't do that. I'll try to remember to go back and do it and make it a smaller link. I don't know why that turned out so big. Okay, anyway, lost track of what I was saying. Anyway, if you're purchasing capitalized equipment, it is supposed to be something that you're going to use for longer than a year. If non-expendable, that is, if the item is damaged or some of its parts are worn, it's more feasible to repair the item than replace it. So that is another criteria. So it needs to be something that can be repaired easier than it can be replaced. So it doesn't need to be something that's super fragile, that if it breaks, you're going to have to replace the entire thing. Basically, these are all just rules for you to keep in mind where you're expending funds on an item that is worth the money. It's worth over $5,000 because it's going to last from year to year to year, and it's going to be used from year to year to year. They don't want you to spend that kind of money on something that is like a one-time use thing, or it's going to break really easily, or it gets damaged fast and costs a fortune to replace or repair. Just be mindful of the things that you're purchasing and make sure that they are good quality items. Okay, then you have procurement transactions that are greater than the micro purchase threshold. So there are different levels of spending by the federal government. I didn't want to go into all of them because the next level up from micro purchase is like a purchase of $250,000 or more, and none of you should be doing that. I can't think of a single time when a 21st century program should be spending more than $250,000 on one purchase. So I didn't even go into that. But you may make a micro purchase. And so that is when you are purchasing, you're making one purchase. It's not necessarily one item, it could be multiple items, but you're spending more than $10,000 in one transaction. Okay, this is considered a micro purchase. Yes, that's considered a micro purchase. I think about it for a second. That is considered, I know that sounds weird because to me, $10,000 is a lot of money and doesn't sound very micro. But when you think of the next step up, think it's small purchase and it's $250,000, you know that you're dealing with federal funding where people are spending billions of dollars in some cases or millions of dollars. And our program is just like a drop in the hat for that. But so micro purchase, more than $10,000. You have to, oh wait, actually, I'm telling you wrong. I'm sorry. I had to think about that for a second. Okay, so under 10,000 is a micro purchase. Over 10,000 is considered a small purchase procedure. Sorry about that. So transactions of 10,000 more must follow small purchase procedures. You must obtain, and this is what those procedures are. You have to obtain price quotes from at least 3 different vendors, or unless they can provide a sole source letter. Okay. So there is a form also that goes with this one. I don't know why I don't have a link to it in this presentation, but again, I'll try to remember to put links to those forms in here before they are sent out by Erica. And Carla's going to add the links. Thank you so much, Carla. But you do have to get price quotes from 3 different vendors. The only time you don't have to do that is if the vendor can provide a sole source letter, and that is basically just a letter in letterhead that basically says we are the only people that sell this product. We are the only people that sell this product or anything that's like it. That would be a sole source letter. So there are some companies that can provide that, but be careful about those because you may have a company that tells you they're sole source, but then when you actually start doing your research, you realize that they're really not the only people that provide a product that's similar to what they have. Now, it could be that their product is the only one that works on a Mac, or their product is the only one that works on a certain type of computer or a certain system or something like that, and they could say they're sole source for that reasoning. But still, just be careful about accepting sole source letters as your one and only thing. Make sure you're doing your research. Make sure you're using Google and that you're seeing what all is out there before you decide on a purchase to make. In that form, you're going to explain the purpose or intended use of the purchase and give us a justification for the need of that purchase as it relates to the anticipated positive impact that purchase is going to have on your program's goals and objectives, which are outlined in your RFA. Okay. So again, it's like a 1-pager, but we do want you to give us the justification of why you need to make this large purchase. You do not have to do this for professional services. So if you're hiring like a consultant to come teach something and that amount goes over $10,000, you don't have to do, that's not considered that does not fall into these regulations. You don't have, that's not considered a small purchase. Yeah, so if you're hiring, like for example, if you don't have any teachers that can, I don't know, let me think of, let's say that you want to have a ballet class in the afternoons, and you need to hire a ballet instructor to come in and teach, and they're going to be doing it 5 days a week. It could be that you end up paying them over $10,000 over the course of the year to teach ballet for your program. You would not have to fill out this request for approval for this form, which is the request for approval for procurement transactions $10,000 or more. Sorry, we didn't have better titles to those forms. You don't have to do that for if you're hiring a consultant or professional services or a professional to provide a service. Okay, does anybody have any questions so far? I haven't seen anything pop up in the chat. I am keeping an eye on it, but if you think of anything, please feel free to ask. That's one thing I hate about these is they're just sit and get, and know it's boring, and that, so please feel free to ask questions. Not, we're going to move on. All right, so just in general, there are certain procurement requirements that you need to be aware of. So for one thing, the federal government asks that you avoid unnecessary or duplicative purchases. So be careful that you're not purchasing the same thing over and over again. I don't know about you guys, but when I was in the classroom, if ever I got moved to a new classroom, I would find items in the closet. I was a science teacher, so I was a high school science teacher. And so we usually had some sort of lab closet or something like that. And I would find items in there, old microscopes and things like that were purchased years and years before that somebody had purchased with money and then put in that closet and forgotten it was even there. That's what we don't want you to do. We want you to make sure that you're keeping up with inventory and that you know what you purchased, and try not to purchase the same things over and over again. Okay, thank you, Carla. She just uploaded that procurement form, approval form for you guys. So wherever you can, consolidate your procurements. Analyze lease versus purchase alternatives. So if you can lease something instead of purchasing it, weigh the pros and cons of that. So for example, if your program needs the first thing that pops in my mind is a copier. Most of the time, your 21st century program is not going to need one of those huge, large copiers just for that. It might be more considered of an indirect cost type thing, might be using those schools copier, but let's just say you did. That's just the first thing that's popping in my head. It might be more, it make more sense to rent a nice copier for 3 years or 5 years for your grant than it would be to purchase one for a really large price, because sometimes those big copiers can cost a lot of money. So just think about that kind of thing. And avoid unnecessary items. Try not to buy things that are not necessary. That's just kind of an obvious given in my opinion, but it's in the federal regulations. There is a preference for U.S. products. It is very, the federal requirements or the federal guidelines ask that you always try to purchase items that were manufactured in the United States if you can. And include this in the contracts and purchase orders when you're using federal funds. Guys, if you can do this, please make sure you do it. Regulations haven't been hard on us as far as I know when it comes to this, but I know in certain programs they're very big on this. Like my husband, I don't know if I've mentioned this to you guys yet, but my husband works here at the state for the child nutrition program. And this rule they are really mandating this rule with child nutrition. And so they're having to purchase food that was grown in the United States. A certain percentage of the food that they purchase has to be grown in the United States. And it's actually causing kind of a bit of a problem because there are just certain things that we don't grow here in the United States. And so the programs are having a really hard time like figuring out, okay, what can I get here? What do I have to get from other countries? And trying to balance that out. And so far they haven't been on us as restrictive on this, but it could be coming. So just try, if you can purchase from the United States, of course, try to do that. And make sure that you put that into your contract and purchase order that you have, that your goal is to do that. There's also some prohibition from certain telecommunication companies. I don't even know how to say these names, but you can look at that. It was funny. I mentioned this in another 21st century meeting, and I thought you guys are probably never gonna have to worry about this. And then somebody spoke up and said, "Yeah, our system tried to buy something from the highway, or I don't even know how you say that company, and it was an issue." So evidently these are fairly common. I just don't know about them myself. But you can verify if a vendor is acceptable by going to www.sam.gov and make sure that they are in compliance, especially when it comes to telecommunication companies. If you're purchasing anything from a telecommunication company, I doubt you guys will do that. But there are a few situations where some CBOs might purchase a cell phone or something like that for their program director or something, which would be allowable. Just be careful what company you're purchasing that from and make sure that it is not on the debar or suspension list, especially when it comes to these telecommunication companies. Also, when you're purchasing anything from any company, you're supposed to check sam.gov to make sure that that company is not on the debarment and suspension list. I don't really know. I'm not really educated on how people get on that list, but I do know that it is something that you guys are supposed to check for before you spend 21st century funds with any company. You're supposed to make sure that they're not on that list. So please make sure that you are doing that and that you're checking sam.gov whenever you're working with a new vendor to make sure they have not been debarred or suspended. And then the other thing is that you're supposed to maintain detailed procurement records, including rationale, selection criteria, and contractor verification. And that goes back to that checking on sam.gov that they're not debarred. You need to be keeping records of all of these things in case you're ever audited. I don't know when the last time Alabama was audited. I don't think it's been any time recently, and so we could be the next one. We could be on the next list of states to be audited, and so you just need to make sure. And I'm not sure what all that involves. I'm assuming it involves us being audited at the state level, but then also them going out to some sites and auditing those as well is what I would guess. And so please just make sure that you are keeping detailed procurement records. And that you're keeping all the records that you're supposed to keep. I believe it's for a period of 5 years that you're supposed to keep these records, but I can check on that. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about MOUs and contracts and when it's appropriate to use each. I believe, I'm not sure if we spoke about this in our RFA meetings or not. I do know that there were some MOU and contract templates that were uploaded into the Cohort 26 application, and I'm not sure if they've been updated or not. I need to check on that. Let me make myself a note to check on that. Actually, instead of me doing it, Carla, I'm gonna see if you'll do that for me. Carla, will you see if the MOU and contracts have been updated for 26 in EGAP? I would appreciate it. If not, we need to make sure we get Eric to do that. At the time when we went through the RFA, we were using some templates that just had been being used for years before. And I think actually with your RFA, I actually kind of stole a template from another state and uploaded it for you to use. But since that time, I have become better educated as to what a memorandum of understanding and a contract really, what the difference between the two are and different situations where you should use the two. Evidently other states, the state that I got a lot of our, I kind of stole a lot of our RFA information from, they just use MOUs. And in the past, we had used MOUs, and I thought that was just the norm. Well, I've mentioned probably in these sessions before that we have a contract with Bruman, the Bruman Company, which is a law firm out of Washington, D.C., that it knows all things federal programs. And I had reached out to Tiffany Kessler from Bruman to see if she would look at, I had updated our MOU template, and I had created two different ones, one for contract or an agreement or understanding with a vendor where you're purchasing an item, and then a separate one where you have an understanding with a vendor that is going to provide a service. And I asked her to look at those, and one of her first questions to me was, why are you having them do an MOU and not a contract? Some of these things, explain to me what the difference between these two is, what the differences are and why you're not having them do a contract. And I just basically said, well, I'm just doing what's been done before me. But I did realize that we needed two separate documents because, the services provided for each one are going to look different. And that's what I want to provide. And so she explained to me when it's appropriate to use an MOU or an MOU and MOA are pretty much interchangeable. It's memorandum of understanding or memorandum of agreement. That's pretty much the same thing. But then you have a contract that's different. And she explained to me that there's different times when it's more appropriate to use an MOU or MOA, and there's times when you should use a contract. And she helped me create templates for those two items. And so that's what we have now, and we'll make sure that that is uploaded for Cohort 26. We did get them uploaded for the current cohort 16 and 17, but I'm not sure that I got it uploaded into 26. So we'll check into that and make sure it's in there. And I do believe I sent this out to you guys in an email, these documents, because I knew that you would be hiring people and you would need this information. But, and I tried to explain it in the email, but hopefully this will be better so I can really go into the details of it. All right, so let's first talk about MOUs or MOAs, okay? The use of an MOU or MOA should be limited to understandings or agreements. Okay, yeah, they do need to be updated in 26. I apologize for that. So we did send them out. I did send them out to you guys in an email if I had your contact information, but if you still need that, please reach out and let us know. But we'll get that uploaded into EGAP as soon as possible. Okay, so the use of an MOU or MOA should be limited to understandings or agreements between the 21st Century Program and the LEA that program is working with. Okay, so basically it's an understanding within an organization. Okay. Okay, thank you, Carla, for uploading that. So it's an agreement within, typically it's going to be within an LEA, okay? So most of you guys are LEAs. There are a few of you that are CBOs. With the CBO, it's going to be a little bit, well, you could have an MOU with your CBO. So let me give you an example. Let's say that your CBO has, let's say you're that you're a YMCA and you have a pool, a local pool. So it may be that for summer programming, you're going to have an MOU or an MOA, even though your 21st century site would have an MOU or an MOA with that local YMCA saying that the kids can come and swim there so many times a week and get swimming lessons. Okay. So it may be that the 21st century program is paying a certain fee for those swimming lessons per child. So there is an exchange of money, but because the 21st century program is ran by that YMCA program, and because they're going to spend 21st century funds to pay the YMCA for a service, letting those kids come and swim at their local pool, they would do an MOU or an MOA. It'd be more of a memorandum of understanding or memorandum of agreement. Another example on the LEA side would be, let's say that I'm just going to throw a county out there, Elmore County is going to do a contract with their transportation department to provide bus services to the kids to take them home each day from the 21st century program. 21st century funds are going to be used to pay the transportation department within that same LEA for mileage or the bus drivers or whatever is required. So that should be in memorandum of agreement. It's a contract within an organization where there is still an exchange of funds, but the exchange of funds is within the organization. It's from one program to another within the same organization. Another example would be CMP. If you're going to contract with your CMP program during the summer to provide snacks, as we've talked about before, that's not typically provided for free. Typically, they provide breakfast and lunch, but can't provide a snack. So let's say that you're going to contract with your CMP program to pay them to provide snacks in the afternoon for your summer program. You would do an MOU or an MOA, and that would include the amount of money that you're going to pay for those snacks. We've talked about the details of that prior to this, okay? So those would be MOUs. You could also use an MOU or an MOA for an agreement from outside of your organization where there's not an exchange of funds. So let's say that you are, you have an agreement with a local church to come provide mentoring services. It's on a volunteer basis, but when you've got something like that occurring, you really do need to have a memorandum of understanding to cover yourself and for them to cover them. What are the expectations? They're going to come here 2 days a week, an hour per day to provide tutoring or to provide mentoring services to our students. This is what's expected of the church. This is what's expected of the 21st century program. And you lay out those details so that there's that relationship or that agreement is never in question, and your bases are covered, right? So trying to think of another example. I can't really think of one right now, but any kind of it could be you had to do an MOU or an MOA to do your original agreement if you submitted an application together for 21st century to apply for this grant. As you know, priority points were given to joint applicants. And so an MOU or MOA should have been created between those two joint applicants saying, okay, this is the services that this program is going to provide to the 21st century program, and this is the services that this program is going to provide. So that would be an example of a case where it's appropriate to use an MOU or an MOA. Okay. Now you should not use an MOU or MOA to avoid procurement. So you would not do this to avoid having to do bids or quotes or anything like that. You still have to follow those procurement laws as needed, okay? All right, so that's MOUs. Next, let's talk about contracts. So a contract should be used when using 21st century funds to purchase goods or services from a vendor outside of that LEA or organization. So this could be to purchase items or it could be to purchase services, okay? You should follow your LEA's documented procurement procedures. Every LEA in the state has procurement procedures. They're supposed to be written, and those are what you should follow if you're an LEA or based 21st century program. If you're a CBO based 21st century program, you should also follow your procurement procedures. And if you don't have procurement procedures at your CBO, then we need to help you write some. And we have resources for you to help you with that. You have to, because you're getting federal funds, you have to have written procurement procedures that you have to follow, right? And so we understand that some CBOs, that may not have been a requirement for you to have that in the past. And so if you don't have written procurement procedures, we have some templates and things like that that we can provide to you to help you write your own procurement procedures for your CBO so that you are meeting that requirement. Okay, and we're not going to dictate what your procurement procedures are as long as they meet federal guidelines and requirements. We don't dictate that. So, for example, in some LEAs, a purchase under a certain amount would not necessarily garner having to have a contract. Maybe you just have to do a purchase order. If that's what your procurement rules say, then that is fine. You could do a purchase order. Now, however, if that's the situation, your purchase order still needs to have certain details in it about that purchase because you're using federal funds. There's certain wording that needs to be in that purchase order to meet the federal regulations. We're going to go over that. And there's certain details that need to be provided about the services that are going to be provided that need to be in that purchase order. And because you're using federal funds. But if that's what your procurement law or rules say, then that is fine. You follow your LEA or CBO's procurement procedures. However, you still have to follow the state and federal methods of procurement. So this is that micro purchase thing that I was talking about a minute ago. So a micro purchase is a purchase under $10,000. You do not have, for micro purchases, you don't have to get competitive price bidding or anything like that. You don't have to get quotes from different companies if you're making a purchase less than $10,000. You can just purchase the item, right? Then you've got small purchases, and that's when the cost is over $10,000 but under $250,000. Sorry, I got confused about that earlier. So small purchase, and I think that's where my brain was setting in. To me, $250,000 is a pretty big purchase, but it's still, federal-wise, it's considered a small purchase, okay? So anything above $10,000 and below $250,000, then you do have to obtain, those price quotes from at least 3 sources. I think the federal regulations say multiple sources. It doesn't give a specific number. It leaves it up to the state. But here in the state of Alabama, we require 3 quotes for you to get. And then if you ever in the situation where you do make a purchase over $250,000, which I don't think any of you will ever fall under, but just good information to know, you do have to you have to go through competitive bidding procedures. And so that is a whole nother detailed thing that has to be done. You have to put out a bid to the public. People have to send in quotes that are sealed, and then you have to open them all at the same time and go with the best bid. And it's just, there's a whole process to competitive bidding. So one nice thing about us not having these huge amounts of funds is that you should not have to deal with competitive bidding. You shouldn't be buying anything over $250,000. Okay. And then again, if you, a lot of times with that goes with, a lot of times a competitive proposal will go with that sealed bid, where just basically that's just the details of what is involved in the bid, basically. But again, you guys should not have to worry about that. All right, so this has to be included whether you're using a contract or a purchase order. You still need to make sure you're detailing the scope of services that are going to be included, or a description of the goods that are going to be provided by the contractor, along with a timeline of services, rate of compensation, and termination provisions. So these are requirements. So if you're doing a purchase order or a contract for items, then you need to make sure that it includes a description of the items that you're purchasing, a timeline of when those items will be provided, how much you're paying for each of those items, and then there does need to be termination provisions. So basically, it's just a statement in there that says if this program is no longer funded, then we can terminate our contract, or we can terminate this purchase order. And right now, that's very important for you to make sure that you've got in all of your contracts and MOUs and MOAs and anything where you're exchanging funds. You need to make sure that you have those termination provisions in there when things are still kind of precarious as far as will we continue to get funding in the future? We don't know yet. So make sure those termination provisions are in all of your contracts and MOAs and MOUs and purchase orders. If you are doing a contract for services, then for example, the example I gave earlier with the ballet instructor, it should say who that ballet instructor is, preferably, just for my peace of heart, if they work for a company, please put the name of the company, or if they have an LLC. It's always a red flag to me when I see a contract just with a person, and they're not a company name or an LLC or something like that. That always worries me. I always go and Google the person and try to figure out who they are and if they have the qualifications needed. And I may even ask you to provide their qualifications, because it always just worries me. This 21st century programs, because you have flexibility with the funds, it would be really easy for someone to hire a friend or an aunt or uncle or cousin or whatever who may not necessarily be the best person for that position, but it would be an easy thing to do. So just be forewarned that you do have to upload these contracts and purchase orders and MOUs into your EGAP application for us to look at. And so whenever you do a contract with just a person, just a straight up, you're writing a check to a person, I'm more than likely going to ask questions about it. So if they work for a company, put that they work for a company, just for peace of mind, that sort of thing. Now, they may not own the company, but it's always helpful. I would also, it wouldn't be a bad idea for you to include that in like your budget narrative, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But for example, I have a niece that has a art degree, and she worked for Pizzazz Art Studio in Prattville here for a long time. She no longer works there, but for a long time she did. And she would be more than qualified for someone to hire to come in and do art lessons with their 21st century program. However, if you just put, I'm paying Haley Vaughn a certain amount of money to do art lessons, I'm going to question it. But if you put, I'm paying Haley Vaughn, who has an art degree and worked for Pizzazz, art studio for 10 years to come in and do art lessons, then I'm not going to question it, because you've already answered my question. You've already shown me that that person is qualified to do that service, right? And so it's always provide more information than not when you're uploading these contracts and things like that, especially if you're hiring a certain person and not a company to do something. Okay, so back to this. Again, when you still need to make sure that when you're doing a contract or a purchase order for services provided by a person or a company, you need to make sure that it is spelled out what they are providing, what services they're providing. And please do not just put that they're going to help you meet your goals. Okay, that's not good enough. I want to know that they're going to come in 2 hours a week and they're going to be doing one-on-one tutoring with students, or they're going to be teaching ballet lessons certain days of the week for however many hours, this many weeks of the year. Okay, be detailed, but don't be general. Don't, because I've last year going through all these MOUs and contracts using the old template, it didn't even require that you put how much you're paying these people. And so that had to be fixed. And so please be detailed in the services that are going to be provided by that person. That not only helps us review it, but it also saves you, because if you have in your contract what services are supposed to be provided in detail, they have to do what they said they were going to do. But if you're super general in the description of what services they're providing, then they can pretty much do whatever they want and you still have to pay them as long as they show up, right? So be careful about when you're creating these contracts that you're detailing exactly what you expect of that person and to get the amount of money that you're going to pay them. You also need to include the timeline of services. They're going to start on this date, and we expect them to work for this many weeks, or we expect them to end on this date, some sort of timeline, right? We understand that may have to be adjusted later on down the line. You may have to do a revision to that contract or that purchase order. For example, a lot of times what ends up happening is they'll hire someone to do, for example, or again, art lessons during the school year, and then they decide they want to continue bringing that person in to do art lessons during the summer. Well, when that happens, you need to go in and revise that contract to extend that timeline of services and to up the budget amount that you're going to pay them and re-upload it into eGap, so that when we see that expense, because a lot of times what ends up happening is you upload the contract one time and it only includes the services for the school year, but doesn't include the summer, and then we end up having to ask you for that. So go ahead and know that is something that needs to be updated to give the full picture of the scope of services that was provided by that contractor. And again, you need to make sure including in there their rate of compensation, and this should also say you need to include the total contract amount. There needs to be a limit at some point, okay? You don't have to pay them that limit, but let's say you're saying you're going to pay this person $100 an hour to provide services 2 days a week for 36 weeks or whatever, however long you're going to do it for. You should be able to calculate a total amount that their services will not go over, okay, and provide that in the contract. Can you adjust it later? Absolutely. But right now, when you start your contract, you need to have both how you're paying them, whether it's going to be an hourly rate or just a lump sum or whatever it is that you're paying them. I prefer hourly rates. Just going to let you know, I prefer an hourly rate where you're saying they're going to get paid this much per hour for this many hours a week for this many weeks. That is what is the preference. And then say how long that's going to happen for, and then have a total amount that you're planning to pay that person overall in their contract. And then that amount should match what's in eGap in your budget. Okay. The reason why we're so picky about this, because if you look, there's some federal guidelines here that I've included so that you understand that it's not just, it's not just a matter of me being anal or want to be in your business, but according to 2 CFR 200.318, grant recipients and subrecipients must maintain oversight to ensure that contractors perform in accordance with the terms, conditions, and specifications of their contract or purchase orders. It says or purchase orders. And so it is part of our job, the State Department, to make sure that when your contract says they're going to be providing certain services, that's the services that they're providing. So that responsibility falls on us. It also falls on your overall, like your program director. If you have 5 sites that your program director is over, it is one of the responsibilities of that program director to be making sure that all the people that have been contracted at those different sites are doing what they said they were going to do in their contracts or purchase orders. Okay. Again, this next bullet is just saying, please upload the contract or purchase order for the services into eGap so that we can ensure that the appropriate terms, conditions, and specifications are included. So I'm trying to back off on this a little bit and give you guys a little bit of flexibility. What I've said in the past, because we want to make sure that we look at these contracts and purchase orders when you upload them. If we just allowed you to upload them at any time, we may not get a notification that you uploaded that item and not know to go in and look at it and check it. And so typically what I've done in the past is said, okay, let's say you know that in the spring you're going to hire somebody to come in and help with gardening. You have a greenhouse at your site and you need someone to come in and teach the kids how to garden, but you don't need them yet. You don't need them now. You're not going to need them until like March or April or something like that. So you're not quite ready to create a contract for that person or a purchase order with that person, because by the time April gets here, that person may not be interested in doing that anymore, or you may have to find somebody else, or whatever the case may be. So typically what I say is go ahead and just put, if you know you're going to spend $3,000 on that person, go ahead and put that $3,000 in materials and supplies. And then when the time comes where you're ready to sign a contract with that person, have them sign the contract, submit a budget revision, move those funds over to purchase services for gardening, upload the contract, and then we'll go in, check it out, approve it, and you're good. Okay. I may become more flexible about this in the future, but for now, I haven't thought of another way around it where I make sure that we are checking to make sure these are done correctly. So, but I'm thinking if you have suggestions, I'm very willing to listen. I don't want to make things hard on you guys. I don't want you to have to do 1,000 different budget revisions. I get that it's a pain, but 2 CFR 200.318 makes me hesitant to not require us to have to go in and look at those contracts, because it falls on us to make sure that the contracts have the appropriate terms and conditions in them, and that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, or that the contractor is doing what they're supposed to be doing. Okay. And then there's certain federally required provisions that have to be included in all federal contracts or MOUs or purchase orders. And so in the templates that I've provided for you, those are in there. Okay, so the contract must include federally required provisions. Now, most LEAs should have these provisions already in the contract they use for their LEA. And so you do not have to use the template that we provide to you. You can use the contract template that your LEA uses for purchases. As long as it does have all of the required provisions in there, you might want to just check and make sure. We assume the LEAs know these things, but sometimes they don't. We find non-compliance all the time. And sometimes it's just, they just didn't know that that had to be in there. So check the LEA's contract up against ours and just make sure it has all the required wording in it. But you're welcome to use that instead of ours. Now, CBOs, you probably don't have a specific contract already made that has all those federal regulations in there. So I would advise you guys to use those templates. I'm fine with everybody using them. It's provided to help you though. It's not a requirement that you use it, but it is a requirement that you have those specific provisions in there. Okay, so let's look at that. And I meant to actually pull one of these up. So if you'll give me a second, I will pull up those templates and go through it with you really quickly. Just one second. I should have already done this. I apologize. It's been a day already. Okay, let's see. Just have to remember where I put it. Hold on just one second. Okay, here we go. All right, I'm going to go ahead and pull them both up. Okay. I'm trying to make sure that this is the correct one. Yes, I believe it is. Okay. Let me make absolutely certain. All right. So since this is the first one that's coming up, I'm going to look at this one first. Even though it says in our presentation, I'm going to go over the MOU first. But this is the sample vendor. Oh, what did I just do? Did I just close it? Oh, my goodness. Well, never mind. I'm going to pull up the MOU one first. It's over. Okay. Hopefully you guys can see this. So basically, when you're going in and looking at this template, anything that's highlighted in this gray color is where you do definitely need to make, you need to change something, right? So first of all, please don't leave Form 3 sample and memorandum of understanding up at the top, okay? This is a sample, but it is for you to tweak and make it look like a professional document. So you don't want to leave that it's a sample across the top. You would delete this part, the beginning part, right? And then replace 21st Century Subgrantee with the name of your site. And then, of course, put in the name of the partner and put the date range that this contract will be in, this MOU will be in effect for. Okay. Again, there's a place here for you to insert the name of the subgrantee and the name of the partner, and a place for you to put their information. Okay. There's a purpose for the MOU. Oh, no, this isn't the final version. I am sorry. This is the version that Tiffany helped me look at. Oh my goodness. See, that's what happens when you don't prepare ahead of time. Sorry about that,
It's
guys.
in the chat.
Oh, thank you, Carla. Okay. Just do that then. I can get it to open. Okay. Get it to drag over. Hold on. Thank you so much, Carla.
Well, it's showing the same thing when I just clicked on it too, so we got to fix it.
Oh, no.
I don't know how to, I will fix it.
Okay. Oh, it does have the comments in. I hate it when there's comments because I always think I've deleted them and then they're still in there. That's just great. Okay. We will fix that. All right. So let me make this bigger so you guys can see it. Promise I'm not always the scatterbrain, but a good bit of the time I am. Oh, I can't really make it bigger. I don't see a way to make it bigger. Here we go. Let's try this. There we go. All right. There's a place for you to fill in your information for the subgrantee, and then a place for you to put in the partner's name, representative position, things like that. This would be a good place to put the company they work for or something like that, especially if you're well, this is an MOU with a partner. Okay, so never mind. I take that back. All right. Okay, so there's a place here for you to put the duration of the contract. So I've got here 1 year, but again, it's highlighted, so you can either leave it this way or you can change it. It could be since this is, it could be that you may want to do an agreement for 2 years or 3 years, and then put the beginning date and the end date. Now, and then it could be annually. You can put that you're going to do the contract for 1 year, and it may be renewed annually for up to 5 years. But again, you can change that. This is not set in stone. Okay. Then you have duties of the parties. So you've got subgrantee responsibilities. Now, please note, these are instructions, right? And so when you actually create, oh, I'm frozen. Am I frozen for everyone? Never mind. Okay, good. Sorry about that. Okay, so please note that it says here, italicized bullets are examples only. Please modify as necessary by removing bullets that do not apply or by adding bullets as needed to fully give an accurate picture of the subgrantee's scope of work. So these are suggestions. These are examples. You do not have to use these bullets. Any bullet that doesn't apply to what your agreement is with that partner, take it out. Add anything that you need to add to it as needed, right? And then when you create that final product, delete this highlighted part that has instructions, right? You're creating a formal document. You need to take out the instructions. And you're probably wondering why I'm saying that. It's because I've seen several sites upload these documents where they literally just kind of left it exactly the way it was, had somebody sign it, and it still had all the instructions. It still said sample at the top. You know, it just didn't look professional. So please think of this. This is a contract. This is an MOU. This is a professional document. Please make sure that it looks professional when you do it, right? So you're going to pick the things that do apply. And if there's certain services that you as a subgrantee are going to provide as part of your partnership that are not listed here, add another bullet. You add the bullets. This is all just suggestions, okay? Then you have the partner's responsibilities. Again, it also has italicized bullets that are examples. Modify as necessary. Remove these instructions. Now, there are non-italicized. All the italicized bullets are suggestions, examples. You don't have to have them in there. Any bullets that are not italicized are required for all MOUs and should not be removed. Okay, so I'm going to show you that in just a second. So these first sets are all italicized, right? So all the way down to participate in advisory team. If you want that partner to participate in your advisory team, keep that bullet. If you don't want them to, take it out, right? Any of these different bullets are just suggestions and examples. Add bullets as needed. However, when you get down to this bullet, require all staff and employees and any contractors or any individuals that work directly with students to obtain appropriate fingerprinting and background checks before working with students, that is a requirement. You cannot take this one out. All these bullets down here that are not italicized must remain, okay? They're requirements of the grant, so, or of spending these federal funds. So you must keep this one. It says provide services or financial assistance, etc. So this is where you're going to put in here what they're providing, only as permitted by 21st Century Program and only at hours approved under the 21st Century Program specifically. And then you're going to put after school, before school, summer, when is it they're providing these services? You can go ahead and put hours if you want to. Specific hours, but again, if it's highlighted in gray, you need to make a change there, okay? But if it's not italicized, these are required bullets, okay? And then again, it reminds you here at the bottom, insert any other additional applicable federal, state, and local requirements here. So you may have some local requirements that you need to add to the contract that I don't have here. There may be some additional federal things that are brand new that pop up that may need to be added in the future. So that's what this last bullet is for. If you don't have anything additional to add, delete it. Okay. Advisory board. Now, if you plan for this partner to serve on your advisory board, keep this section. If you don't want them to serve on the advisory board, take the section out. It's just a suggestion, right? So as a 21st Century partner, you can ask them to serve on your advisory board, which you're supposed to have 2 advisory meetings per year. And you may want to do that. It makes sense for your partners to be on your advisory board. So, you know, it makes sense to have this section, include the name of the partner here, and have them serve on your advisory board. Funding. This is a very important part. In this section, clearly describe the financial obligations by both parties as applicable. Include the amount for each separate category. So remember, this is a partnership. So this would be, for example, the MOU that is filled out between the 2 partners who submitted the application together for 21st Century. Now, if you've already done this, I'm not going to make you redo it, but you might want to redo it if, you know, to include these required bullets, but it's not something I'm going to require at this time if you've already created this MOU with your partners. But any future partners, you need to make sure that you're using the correct document. Okay, so you would include the salaries, contracted services, materials and supplies that are going to be provided, and which party is responsible for which costs. So it may be, I think I've seen an example where someone had a partnership with like maybe McWane Science Center or something like that to come in and teach STEAM lessons. And they were providing materials and equipment. They were providing the teachers to come in. And this is where you would detail what exactly was being provided by McWane Science Center, and then how much money was being provided by the 21st Century Grant but really that would be done in a contract. So that's probably not the best example. So let me think of a different one. Let's say you're doing an MOU with your CMP program. This is where you would include the financial obligations. So you would put in how much money you're going to pay for those summer snacks that we talked about earlier, how much money you're going to pay per snack, what the total amount is going to be. So it could be you're going to pay I'd rather be more detailed than not detailed enough. So for example, you might say we're going to pay $1.50 per snack for 50 children for 45 days, right? And then put a total cost. That's what the CMP program is going to provide, and then you're providing the amount of money that you're going to pay for those snacks, right? So that's just another example of what would go here in this funding section. What are you paying for? Who's paying it? Who's responsible for funding? Are both partners providing something that require an exchange of funds, or is it just one? Is one providing exchange something for money and the other one's providing a service? You need to put that here. In addition, the partner will provide blank if applicable. Again, this is where you would list funds, services, and other commitments. So it may be that there's other things that are going to be provided that don't have to do with funding. So you would include that part, you would include that here. So trying to think of an example with CMP. Let's say the CMP program is going to provide a CMP worker to hand out the snacks. That would be a service they're going to provide. It may be that they're not charging you for that. It may be that they are. It just depends on what the situation is. But that's the only example I could think of that would go right here for that particular example. Okay, availability of federal funds. You need to make sure that your MOUs have this statement about the MOU is subject to the appropriations and receipt of federal funding under Title 4B of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act to the subgrantee. If the subgrantee for any reason fails to receive its subgrant award or any continuation of subgrant awards, then this MOU terminates upon notice to the partner. So again, if funds are cut, you have this provision in here that says that that contract is no longer in effect if funds are cut. Okay, then you also have procedures for modification and termination. This is a requirement. Notice that these are not in italics. These are requirements. So you have to have in here provisions or procedures for how the contract can be modified and how it can be terminated. You do not necessarily have to use these exact termination policy. Like if your LEA has a different termination policy than what's written in here, you can change it. Just understand that you do have to have procedures for modification and termination in your MOU. And then there's just a place for you to put any other provisions and then signatures for both parties. Okay, so that's the MOU. And then really quick, we'll pull over the vendor contract. Remember, this is when you're purchasing goods or services from outside of your organization. If I can remember how to make this bigger, you guys can see it. So at the top, it looks the same. Again, you're going to remove, you could keep vendor contract, but I would definitely remove Form 3 sample. You're going to put in your subgrantee name, your contractor name. This is the case where I was talking about contractor name, contract representative. If you're contracting with a person, you might want to put here under, representative that they work for a certain company, what their position is, so that you are kind of giving, this is a good place where you could include information about the person that says that they are qualified to actually serve in this position. You've got the purpose, the duration of the agreement. Again, it's the same as the MOU. Scope of services. Again, I don't know why this is not highlighted, but italicized bullets are examples only. Modify as necessary. Non-italicized bullets are required in all contracts and should not be removed. Okay, but you would want to remove these instructions before you actually have this contract signed, right? So notice this first one is not italicized, so this one's a requirement. The contractor agrees to provide the following services or goods. This is where you're going to put a description of the goods that are being provided or the services that are being provided and the timeline. They're going to provide it for this many days, a week, a month, a semester, for example, adjust as needed. And then the rest of these are in italics, so they can be kept or they can be removed. They can be removed if not needed. You can read through those. Contractor agrees to provide counseling support, amount of time, hours a day. If this is not a contract with a counselor, you don't need this bullet, right? I have seen where people are submitting this document for a dance teacher and they still are leaving the bullets in about providing counseling and support. That's not, a dance teacher is not providing counseling and support, I don't think, unless they've got, I don't know. Anyway, you get my point. If the bullet doesn't apply to what the person is providing, then take it out, as long as it's a italicized bullet, right? If you work your way down, you get to the non-italicized bullets. Contractor agrees to provide services only as permitted, but that's the same ones we talked about earlier in the MOU. A lot of these are going to be very similar to the ones that were in the MOU. I'll let you look at those. Again, if you're using your LEA contract, it needs to have these same provisions in it because these are all required by federal law. There's a place for you to put funding and compensation. These bullets are required. Contractor will invoice subgrantees as follows. And so this is where you're going to put your contractor compensation and rates. Contractor shall submit detailed invoices to the subgrantee identifying the service rendered. So insert details for how you want them to invoice their services, including how those invoices should be submitted, details required, deadlines, etc. That all needs to be included. These are all federal requirements, right? Of a contract or a purchase order. I don't give you a purchase order one, but it still needs to have these items in it. Again, you have that termination. If the funds are cut, then the contract is null and void. And your modification and termination procedures are in here. Again, they don't have to remain exactly the same, but you do have to have them. And then contracts have to have these federal provisions. The MOU does not have to have these, but the contract does. And so there's a provision in here about debarment and suspension. There's a provision in here about domestic preferences for procurements. That's, in other words, buying United States produced products. The ban on foreign telecommunications. So these are all those bullets that I talked about in that other slide. Record retention requirements, certification of equal employment opportunity. You're not going to discriminate against anyone. Goes all into that. This is all, I think this all have to do with discrimination and the equal employment opportunity laws. I'm not going to read all these to you, but all of this has to be in all contracts or purchase orders. Okay. And then the next 5 federal provisions may be removed from the contract if not applicable. See highlighted statements. So these are requirements for certain types of contracts. So for example, this first one is required for contracts with small businesses or nonprofits. So if you're having a contract with a small business or nonprofit, you have to include this provision: rights to inventions made under a contract or agreement. I'll let you read that. Then there's so if you are doing a contract for over $2,000 for construction, renovation, painting, etc., which you shouldn't be doing with 21st century funds, then you would include this paragraph. I started to not put it in there, but I went ahead and left it. Just there, who knows? There could be something that happens in the future where this would be an allowable expense. So I just went ahead and left it. But if you're not doing a contract for over $2,000 for construction, renovation, or painting, you don't need to include this paragraph. The next one, contracts over $100,000 have to include the Byrd anti-lobbying amendment. Again, you're probably not going to have a contract for over $100,000, but it's there just in case. And then another requirement for contracts over $100,000 is the Contract Work Hours and Safety Standards Act provision. Again, you're probably not going to need that. You can take it out. This one, required for contracts over $150,000, the Clean Air Act and Federal Water Pollution Control Act provision. Again, you're probably not going to need that. You can take it out. And then there's a place for you to insert any other provisions. For example, if you require for them to have insurance, permission to subcontract, liability, indemnification clauses, anything like that that you want to add to the contract that's required by your LEA or CBO, you would add that here. And then there's a place for signatures. All right, anybody have any questions about these contracts or MOUs? Again, these are just templates for you to adjust as needed, but just keep in mind that if it's not written in italics, it is probably a requirement. Read the instructions, and it will say in there which items are required and which items are not. To close that. All right, I'm just going to keep trucking. And if you have questions, I'm keeping my eye on the chat and just let me know if anything pops up. So we walked through the MOU template. We walked through the contract template. Okay, so this is just a reminder that this is a Word document, so you can modify it as needed, and it should be modified. Items that need to be modified are highlighted in gray. Read instructions for each section. They will indicate what can and can't be removed or added to the document. Please be a professional and create a professional looking document. Once your edits are made, remove the highlighted areas, remove the template instructions, remove Form 3 sample from the header, and don't make handwritten edits to the template. Can't tell you how many contracts I get that are submitted that are handwritten. If you have to, I understand that you might need to. I understand that some people may not have access to computers or things like that, or may not have access to a printer where they can print it out or scan it in, easily. But please just keep in mind that this is a formal document. It is a contract. It is a MOU, and it should be treated as such, and really shouldn't be handwritten unless you absolutely have to. I'm not going to say we're not going to accept handwritten ones, but it would definitely be more professional if it is typed. All right. So next we're going to get into the EGAP application. Right now, you guys have an EGAP, what would be considered just a regular application because you filled it out applying for the grant. But in future years, as you go forward, you'll do a continuation application each year. The purpose of the continuation application is just for you to budget out your funds and to make, there'll be a place for you to make any changes that you need to the grant. You can't make major changes. According to the federal regulations for 21st century, they don't want major changes to be made once a grant has been awarded because they want you to try to keep your program, especially like your program goals and objectives, the same because it was a competitive grant. And it was scored by peer reviewers, multiple peer reviewers scored it and looked at it and gave you the award. They don't want you to then turn around and just completely change it to something different. So, but you are able to make minor changes as needed. So for example, there's been situations in the past where maybe an LEA decided to close down a school or consolidate two schools together. And so we had to look at changing like the name of the program or the name of the school that was being served. Now we tend to try to keep it the same students that the grant was originally written for. So if the grant was, so for example, if you had a K2 school and then a 3-5 school, and then those two were and you had a grant, you wrote the grant for the K2 program or the 3-5 program, whichever one, just one or the other, and then they consolidated those two schools together, typically we would ask you to continue to just serve those K2 students. Now, if funding permitted and there was a significant need, we might let you add a grade. So we might let you serve like K3 instead of K2, something like that. It just depends on the situation, and whether there's funding to do so and whether it makes sense to do so, whether those kids had the same needs as the kids that you were already serving, things like that. So that is where you would make changes like that. Now, if things like that happen during the year, you are expected to let us know. There is a application revision form that you can fill out if you need to make a major revision to your program halfway through the year. Please, especially in the situation where a school is closed down or something like that, and you've had to move the program to another location, you must let us know immediately at the State Department. We had a situation this past year where I ran all the numbers for schools, and we had students at a school that did not have a grant and no numbers for the school that did have the grant. And I did not realize that the school that had the grant had closed down, and they moved the kids to a new school, had a new name. Nobody ever told us. And that, thank goodness we caught it and were able to fix it. But we should have been told as soon as it happened so that there was no confusion and running the numbers and things like that. Because if we're ever audited by the feds, that would really look bad on us if we were giving funding to one school, but it was actually going to another, even if there was a good reason for it, right? So we just need to be made aware of things like that. But every year you'll do your continuation application. Typically they're due by November 15th. And this past year, we still have some sub-grantees from this year who still have not have approved application. That will not be the case for this coming year. At some point, we haven't established the exact date yet, but we're trying, all federal programs is trying to come up with a cut-off date that if you don't have an application submitted by a certain date, then you will lose your funding. And we are very much wanting to do that with 21st Century as well, just because it puts everybody in a really bad situation when you get through the school year and you still don't have an approved application. You've been spending 21st Century money without approval. And it could really end up badly for those sites who do that, because what if they've been buying things that are not allowed? What if we don't approve some of the costs or the amount that they're paying certain employees or something like that? What if we don't approve it? Well, they made those purchases. They made those funding decisions without approval from the state. So if we come back and say, no, I'm sorry, that's not approved, then that site is going to have to eat that cost. They will not be able to be reimbursed for those costs. And so it's really in everybody's best interest to make sure you get your continuation application in as quickly as possible so that you know that the things that you're buying and you know that the people that you're paying and all the things that you're spending money on are allowable items. And so you don't get caught in this situation where you get to the end of the year and you have all of these expenses that have racked up and we're not going to reimburse you for them because it's not an allowable expense. That's the risk you take if you wait too long. But again, for this next year, we do plan to have a cutoff date at some point. I'm not exactly sure what that date is going to be yet, and it may not happen. I'm not sure. But I know at one time it was going to be November 15th, but that has been pushed for now. So I'm just waiting on further instruction from Dr. Killingsworth, who is my supervisor, and she's over all federal programs. Okay, so let's talk about, first I'm going to talk about function codes. There are some function codes that are in the RFA that were incorrect. Again, I'm new. And so as I've seen things that needed to be corrected, and basically our whole staff is new. And so as our staff has seen things that need to be corrected, we've been fixing things. And so there may be some function or object codes in here that are different than what was in the RFA. And so this is important for you, to have. It probably would be a good idea. I think we're going to provide some handouts to you guys. We'll try to print some of these for you guys. and put it in your little packet for Mega. Melissa, if you're listening, probably a good idea to print these function and object codes for them to have on their desk. But these are the codes that you're expected to use in EGAP for your budget, okay? Again, refer to this and not to necessarily what was in the RFA, because there have been some changes made just as we've seen that things were incorrect, or as we've been corrected by other departments. For example, we were telling people to use a certain object code for gasoline, and then I was actually called by the head of the Department of Transportation, and he was like, we have people that are getting cited because they're using the code for gasoline when they really should be using the code for mileage. So that's been updated. So things like that, as we find out that we're doing, as we know better, we do better, right? And so that's why you might have some changes. All right, so 2215, the function codes are just overall general functions of the program. There's only a certain number that you're even allowed to use within the EGAP application for 21st century. Most things are going to fall under 9130, which is extended day or dependent care programs. But there are a few exceptions to that fall outside of just being considered extended day or dependent care purchases. So one of those is 2215 for instructional staff development services. So this is going to be when you pay for your staff to attend local trainings, professional development. It could be in-state PD or out-of-state PD, or if you pay to have a speaker come in to provide professional development to your staff, okay? This would not, I probably need to add that here. This would not include PD for administrators. I'll add that right now. Okay, so administrative PD actually falls under general administrative, which is 6,000 through 699. So any of your professional development that your program director or site coordinator or data entry person is going to, that's going to fall under 6,000 through 699. This is PD for your staff that works with students, your non-admin staff, right? So for example, and I don't know if you guys are all reading the weekly emails that come out that Erica sends out each Friday, but something that we are doing this year that I'm super excited about is the ACEA conference. ACEA has typically in the past been attended mostly by 21st century sites, but there also are other after-school program people that go to the ACEA conference. And it's always been a required conference in the past. So this year we did not necessarily make it a required. In the past, it's been a required conference for site coordinators and program directors. For this past year, after reading the feedback, there was a lot of comments from people outside of 21st century that said things like, I really wish that you would have more sessions that pertain to all after-school programs, not just 21st century. You've got too many administrative type sessions for 21st century. There was just a lot of comments like that. And I agree. There was a very heavy focus on administrative sessions, 21st century sessions. And so I have met with Lindsay Blevins and Jennifer Baker, who are running the conference this year, and we sat down together and talked about how we could fix this or how we could address this. And what we've ended up coming up with is that this year ACA is going to really focus more on instructional staff, best practices for after-school programming and summer programming, any kind of out-of-school time programming, and it's not really going to focus very much on administrative type sessions. Those are going to be handled, like for you guys, they're being handled right now. And we'll probably do a 1 or 2 day training for cohort 17, new site coordinators and new program directors to go over this information that they might need. But we're not going to focus on it at ACA. We're really going to focus on quality programming for after school and summer programs that will be good for anybody who's running not just 21st century, but any kind of after school program. And it may even be, you know, if we are in the situation where 21st century goes away, who knows, there could be something that comes in to take its place for after school programming. And so this fits right in with that. I don't know that. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying I'm speaking hypothetical here, but we want ACA to really meet the needs of that program staff that really works with the students and make sure that what they're doing in their after school programming and their summer programming is actually affecting student achievement. So what I'm super excited about is I got permission from Dr. Killingsworth, again, head of federal programs, to allow you guys to close your 21st century site down on the days of the conference, which is November the 17th, 18th, and 19th, if I remember correctly. Hold on. Yes, November 17th through the 19th, those 3 days. You will be allowed to close your 21st century program. You just need to let your parents know that it'll be closed on those 3 days from the beginning of the school year, and then remind them several times leading up to November 17th if you choose to do this, so that they can find other after school help, you know, for their children, a place for their children to go to. Thank you, Lindsay. Lindsay's putting in the registration information in the chat right now. And this, your expenses for this, for ACA, would fall under 2215 is where I was going with this. I'm sorry, I tend to ramble. But you can go ahead and use FY25 funds. So those of you who are cohort 16 that got the 26 grant, you can go ahead and sign up for registration. And so can the 26 grantees can sign up as well using FY25 funding. You'll have to put it into that extra application you guys are going to have to do once it's ready. I haven't gotten any update on it being ready yet, but once it's ready, you can put it in there. And I see a good question. I'm going to answer that in just a second, Juanita. But that expense would fall under 2215. Any other professional development that you allow your instructional staff to go to would fall under 2215. Now, a question just popped up. If PD and travel for site coordinators are now including an administrative, will the cap for admin be raised? In the past, this has only included salaries and fringes. So no, it will not. It will not. The cap needs to stay at 30%. But in all federal programming, other than 21st century, and I don't know why it hasn't been done this way in the past, but for all federal programs, whenever you have administrative costs, it goes under 6,000 through 699. That's for Title I, Title II, any of the title programs. Whenever you have admins, a cost involving admins, whether it's materials and supplies. So, for example, if you're buying a laptop for an administrator, it should go under 6,000 through 699. If you're traveling, if the administrator is going to PD, it should go under 6,000 through 699. But I will say that I'm trying very hard to keep this in mind and reduce the number of mandatory trainings that admins have to go to. Trying to do most trainings virtually like this one is, so that you don't have to have that travel and cost. The only thing that I'm requiring admins to go to for this year is Mega for cohort 26. 17 and 16 they were invited. They were welcome to come. We hope they come, but the only people that were required to come was cohort 26, and also most cohort 26 subgrantees got a much larger grant than have been given in the past, and so that hopefully that will help with that cost. Because you have a larger grant, your 30% cap is going to be a lot larger, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to pay your administrators more money. Some of you may not be paying your admins enough and might need to up their salaries, but because the admin cap has been increased, because the budget is increased, doesn't mean that you need to give your admins, it doesn't mean you have to spend that 30% cap, right? You still need to pay a reasonable amount of money for a reasonable amount of hours and things like that. especially with CBOs, and I'm not trying to pick on CBOs, but especially with CBOs, I oftentimes see where they do their very best to meet that admin cap. And a lot of times it makes no sense. The hours that they're saying that they're going to pay their admins would basically mean that they're there 80 hours a week, and that doesn't, it doesn't add up. Now, when they still have to submit their ES2s, and I think what ends up happening is they don't actually pay those people more than they're supposed to, but then they've put into their budget a huge amount of money to pay these people, and then it ends up just being carried over to the next year because they don't spend it. So we want you to be mindful about what you're paying people in the budget you create at the beginning of the year. Okay, I'm sorry, I got way off track, but this is important stuff for you guys to know. All right, so 2215, instructional staff development services. 2290 would be other instructional staff services. This is where you would put your external evaluator, okay? And I can't really think of anything else that would go under this category, but if I think of something, I will let you know. If somebody else thinks of something that might go under 2290, let me know in the chat. 4188 is the code that should be used for transportation. And so you will use function code 4188 when you are using local school buses. The bus driver salaries would fall under 4188. Their benefits would fall under 4188, and mileage would fall under 4188. Also, if you're contracting a bus for like a field trip, it would go under 4188, and we've got those the object codes that go with that on the next slide. Then you've got general administrative. There's two different ones. You've got 6,000 through 699 for the regular school year, and then you've got 6,000 through 6,999 summer, okay? So you need to budget your administrative staff for the school year and then budget them again for the summer, okay? So this would be your general administrative staff would be personnel that don't service students directly, such as your program director, site coordinator, your easy reporter, if you want to call them that. In other words, your data entry person, bookkeeper, CSFO, and also indirect costs also fall under 6,000 through 699. While I'm on that, I will probably talk about this again in the future, but I do need to mention this now. Indirect costs, you have to use, so if you're an LEA, you need to use the indirect cost that's been assigned to your LEA. So there's an indirect cost rate that you can apply for with the federal government. All LEAs have one, and it fluctuates. The amount fluctuates depending on the LEA. CBOs can also apply for an indirect cost rate, but most do not have one and haven't gone through all the paperwork to apply. So federal regulations say that CBOs can use a restricted indirect cost rate of 8%. And so that is what we mandate here at the State Department, unless the CBO has applied for a different indirect cost rate that is more than 8%. And if they can provide us with that documentation that they have a current indirect cost rate that's more than 8%, then they can upload that into EGAP, and we will allow them to use the indirect cost rate that was assigned to them by the federal government. But if you don't have one, then the percentage is 8%. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just talk about indirect costs really quick. Again, I'll probably talk about it again later, but I still want to go ahead and mention it just so that it doesn't hurt for you to hear things multiple times. Indirect costs are for things that that are required to run a program, but those items don't only apply to 21st century. So for example, rent, utilities, that sort of thing would all go under indirect costs, okay? A lot of sites don't do rent. This usually applies mainly to CBOs who try to charge rent to the grant for office space, or it's possible they may have rent a space for the actual 21st century program. But that would be, but now if that space is only used for the 21st century program, I believe it could be considered direct cost, but I would have to check into that to make sure. But in most times, that space is not only used for 21st century, it's used for other things too at that CBO. So for example, you know, a YMCA or a Boys and Girls Club, they run more than just an after school program. So the way the wording in the federal regulations basically says is that in order for you to, so for example, utilities, if you wanted to charge 21st century, and we've had sites want to do this before. We've had it where the school said, we want you to pay for utilities to run your program from, you know, after school. So if you're using our building from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock each day, we want you to pay us a percentage of our utilities. Well, the federal government says that's not possible because there's no way to determine exactly how much electricity is used just between 3 and 5 o'clock for that building just for 21st century. You can't do that. So what you can do is charge indirect costs up to that percentage that you're allowed to charge. You don't have to tell me what the indirect cost is for. It could be for rent or utilities or things like that. You can put that in there if you want to, but you don't even have to say that. You can just say you're charging the grant 8% indirect cost, and then you use that for what you need to use it for. But and this was something that I learned this year. Again, my husband works for child nutrition, and he was explaining to me that there's a lot of times when a kitchen, you know, has all that kitchen equipment, and they want to charge the CMP program for electricity because of the ovens and everything that use so much electricity, but they just can't do it because you would have to have a specific meter just for the kitchen, you know, not for the entire building and just for the hours that it's running, you know, it is, you just can't, it's just too much. So same thing applies to 21st century. In order for you to charge utilities to 21st century as a direct cost, you would have to have a separate meter that just keeps all the electrical for those specific hours of the program, the specific rooms that are being used by the program, and that's just, it's not impossible, but it's not likely that's going to happen. So you use indirect costs to pay for things like that. All of those fall under 6,000 through 699. Then again, you have to do the same thing for summer. So it could be the exact same personnel. You could have it could be your program director, site coordinator, an easy reporter that works for the summer, but you still have to do a separate line item, and it would fall under 6,000 through 699. Again, you can charge indirect costs for the summer, but really you can only charge 8% for the total grant amount. So you probably only just need to charge for indirect costs one time, not once for the school year and once for the summer, because then you got to figure out, well, how much of my grant is going towards summer, how much of my grant is going towards school year. That would just be way too complicated. So just do one indirect cost for your program. All right, and then everything else usually falls under 9130, which is your extended day dependent care. So this would be if you're hiring a lead teacher, your regular teacher, assistant teacher, student assistants, your easy report contract would fall under 9130. The contract, the $900 contract with easy reports would go under 9130. If you're hiring a mental health professional, a licensed counselor, a nurse, janitorial services, cleaning supplies, security guard services, equipment, technology, materials, supplies, all of that, if it's something that you're hiring for or purchasing for your after school program, it goes under 9130. If it's somebody you're hiring, if it's some non-administrative staff that you're hiring for your summer program or materials or supplies that you're buying for your summer program, it would go under 9130 summer. Okay, so those are your function codes. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat. All right, now we have object codes. Oops, sorry. Object codes. So every line item in your budget will have a function code and it'll have an object code. Object codes are a little bit more specific. Sorry, let me let these people in really quick. All right. Object codes are more detailed expenditures. Okay. So for example, whenever you're doing salaries, whether that salary falls under administrative salary or whether it falls under 9130 for your extended daycare for your non-administrative staff, you're still going to use the object code you're going to use object code 010 through 199, which is salaries. Okay. Now there's smaller object codes that are more specific that fall between 10 and 199, but we don't ask you in our application to be that specific. Okay. We just ask you to put 10 through 199. So this again would be your program director, site coordinator, data entry person, bookkeeper, teacher, lead teacher, assistant teacher, student assistant, nurse, counselor, any people that you're paying a salary to would fall under salaries. Now you would not put contracted services here. So if you're contracting for someone to come in and teach your ballet class, that would not be salary. That are not an employee of your program. This is salary. This code is used for salaries for employees of your 21st century program. And so that you would not use a contracted service. You would not put that under salaries. Okay. Now notice we do have a specific code that does fall between 10 and 199 for bus drivers. But we go ahead and give you that one. So the code for bus driver is 161. And this would be a bus driver from an LEA. So if you are, again, it would go under function code 4188. If you have an MOU or MOA with the LEA to provide bus services, either after school or during the summer for your 21st century program, then you would pay those bus drivers using function code 4188 and object code 161. Okay. Typically, let me go ahead and tell you about bus drivers. Typically, bus drivers are paid an hourly rate, but sometimes it depends on the LEA. Sometimes LEAs pay their bus drivers based on the route that they take. So if the bus driver drives a longer route, they pay them a different price. And so that's fine. If that's the way that your LEA pays their bus drivers, it's fine for you to do that. So just make sure you explain it. So either put that you're paying them per hour or you're paying them per route and the amount that you're paying them for that. Again, too much information is better than not enough when we're having to ask you questions about it. Then 200 through 299 is employee benefits. All personnel being paid through salaries should also be paid benefits, right? So we check that. That's one of the things we look for. If you say that you're paying under your salaries, you're paying a counselor and a nurse, we're going to look to make sure that you have benefits for the counselor and the nurse under salaries. Now, if you're contracting for a counselor to come in and work, then no, we wouldn't expect you to have benefits necessarily. If you're contracting for a nurse to come in and work, we wouldn't necessarily expect you, we wouldn't necessarily expect that. So there's a question that popped up. Easy Reports Director was considered admin in the past. Is this still the case? Yes. So you can call them the Easy Report Director or data entry person or whatever, but yes, that would still be considered an administrative position because they don't work directly with students. They are more on the administrative side, entering data and that sort of thing. So yes, that is still considered admin. Okay. Okay. Employee benefits. Okay, I've already talked about that. All right. So next you have your purchase services, and we have purchase services is 300 through 399, but there are some specific codes for certain ones that you can use. Okay. So again, purchase services is anytime you have contracted services. Your Easy Report contract would fall under purchase services. Vendors, speakers, those would all be considered purchase services. Okay. Also, travel falls under purchase services. So travel within the state of Alabama is actually object code 382. And then travel outside the state of Alabama is object code 383. So your reimbursements that you're going to pay, your mileage, your hotel stay, food, that sort of thing. However, so for that, let me just go ahead and let you know about that one. If you're an LEA, we ask you to follow your LEA rules and regulations when it comes to travel. So if you pay a per diem for travel, which is basically a lump sum per day that they would use for their hotel and food, then that's what we will reimburse you for with 21st Century. That's what we expect you to do for 21st Century. If you pay actual costs, then that's fine too. You just follow your LEA's procedure. For CBOs, same thing. You should have a procedure in place. You should have some sort of written guidelines as to how you pay for travel. A lot of CBOs, for example, will pay actual cost of meals. That's okay as long as you make sure that when you submit your receipts for that meal is just for one person and it does not include any kind of alcohol. So if that's your rule, that you're going to pay for actual reimbursement for meals, then that's your rule, and we will support it. But you cannot use federal funds to pay for alcoholic beverages, and you can't use it to pay for company or other people at the dinner table. So so if one person went on the trip, they should have a receipt for their food, and it should not include any kind of alcoholic beverage. Okay, charter buses. I'll get to charter buses in a second. I thought I had that on here. Yeah, I do. Okay. So somebody asked about charter buses. Okay, so this may be one of the ones that changed because they said the form you have from September says $399, but it also has $453. Okay, so I looked these up to make sure they were correct. So charter bus is actually code 392. Okay, so I'm sorry for inaccurate things that have been told you guys in the past, but it is 392. I skipped mileage. Okay, so here's one that we've been telling people wrong, evidently for a while. If you were using an LEA provided transportation, school buses, in other words, we were telling people to use the gas code, which was like 451 or something like that. That's the one that the transportation department called me about and said, hey, please stop telling people to use this code because they're getting sightings for it. They're getting in trouble for it. Tell them to use mileage instead. So the code for mileage is 391. So again, if you are using LEA provided buses for transportation, whether it's for every day, like back and forth from your summer program or after school, taking kids home, or whether it's for a field trip, you would use 391 if it's an LEA provided bus. If you're chartering buses, especially in most of the cases, this is going to be for a field trip, which is fine for you to do if you have the funds to do so. As a matter of fact, for really long trips, we would much rather you use a charter bus if you're taking kids on a really long trip because they have bathrooms and things like that, more comfortable, air conditioning, all of that. If you can afford to do it, please feel free to charter a bus. The object code you would use would be 392 for that. Okay. All right, let's go to materials and supplies. So this, you're going to use object code 400 through 499. We don't ask you to get specific on most of these things. There are a few exceptions below. But this is going to be your evidence-based curriculum, your supplies, technology, equipment. If you're purchasing something like drones for your kids for enrichment, that would fall under materials and supplies. Any kind of materials and supplies for students and staff would fall under 400 through 499. Now, there are some specific ones that have been added. One thing specifically is food. So you would need to use object code 461 for food. Please make sure that if you are purchasing food, that you explain what this food is being used for in your budget narrative. And when I say budget narrative, what I'm talking about is when you go into EGAP and you do your budget, there's a place for you to put these codes, and then there is a place for you to put written out explanation of what the expense is, right? That's your budget narrative. So in your budget narrative, if you're buying food, you need to say purchase of food for nutritional lessons, or purchase of food for culinary class. Or if it's summer, purchase of snacks from CMP program for summer programming. And then please note that anytime, now you don't have to do this if you're purchasing food for an enrichment activity, but if you're purchasing food for your summer program, if you're purchasing food for a field trip, I don't know if I've mentioned that to you guys. That's something new too. All kinds of new things keeps coming out. So something that has come up this summer, I'm sorry I'm rambling, but something that came up this summer, am I supposed to be done by now? Okay, now I'm going to 12, right? All right, so something that came up this summer was an issue where field trips were having issues with providing food during the field trip. Maybe they're going on a long trip, over a 4-hour trip away, and they need to be able to provide food. Well, in the past, we've always made 21st century sites, we've always made 21st century sites try to find a sponsor to pay for the food. Remember, you cannot charge kids anything, for any kind of fees or anything, including you can't make them pay for their own food on a field trip. Now you can ask them, you can ask them to bring money for snacks and not required snacks, but like stuff that, souvenirs and things like that. But you can't, if it's something that they need. And I think we looked it up. If your program is running over 4 hours, you should provide a meal or snacks or something during that time, right? So we had a question from some sites asking if they could purchase food for field trips. The way it came about was that the CMP program it was first summer, their CMP program in their LEA wasn't running on Fridays. It only ran Monday through Thursday, and they always took their field trips on Friday. And they were having an issue getting the CMP program to commit to like packing school lunches for the next day. And it was also an issue because when they do that, they had to find a way to keep the lunches cold, and they had to serve them by a certain time, per regulations of the CMP program, because you can only, a packed lunch is only good for so long. And so it was just causing all kinds of issues. And so I got permission from Dr. Killingsworth to allow that under certain circumstances. So anytime that something like this comes up and you want to purchase food for your summer program or a field trip, you have to get permission first. You have to submit a proposal that basically provides a justification of why this is a need, why you need to spend 21st century funds on food, and a plan of where you're going to get that food from, and an explanation of why that place is reasonable and necessary. Now, we thought about putting like a cutoff, like saying, a $10 limit for a meal or something like that. But I don't want to do that because I don't want to limit you, especially with how much things cost nowadays. It may be that the only source for food in that area is actually $12 per child. So I don't want to put a cap on it, but you do need to make an effort to try to find the most reasonable and cost-effective food source possible. So, ordering pizza, going by the pizza place and having a pizza for every four or five kids might be more cost effective than buying every kid a Chick-fil-A adult meal from Chick-fil-A. Buying a value meal from McDonald's might be cheaper than the meal from Chick-fil-A. So even though the Chick-fil-A meal is probably a little bit healthier, but you know what I mean, just provide a justification of why you need to spend that money and the reasoning for it. But don't just expect it to be approved and go spend the money without prior approval, because if you do that, then we are not going to reimburse you. Even if it's something that we would have approved, because the rule is you have to have approval first before you do it. Now, again, you don't have to do that if you're purchasing food for an enrichment activity like a culinary class or a nutritional class or something like that. But if you're purchasing during the summer any snacks or food using 21st century funds, you have to submit a proposal for that. And if you're purchasing food for a field trip, you need to submit a proposal for that. And we don't have a specific form that we've created. If we need to do that, we can do that. But basically, we just want you to write a proposal justifying the need and the cost. Okay, can cleaning supplies be purchased for use during our summer and school year programs, or does that fall under indirect costs? If they can be purchased, what object code should be used? So this is one of those things that technically I think it should fall under indirect costs, but we have allowed it to be put under materials and supplies before, just within reason, right? We want to make sure it needs to be a reasonable amount of cleaning supplies. It doesn't need to be that you're buying cleaning supplies for the entire school because they're letting you use their space. We've had schools say, hey, you know, well, since we're letting you use our space, can you buy us one of those big floor buffing machines that cost $4,000 or whatever? Well, the answer to that is no, because 21st century funds are really just supposed to be specifically used for the 21st century program and not for the school in general. So no, we're not trading out where we're going to buy you a big floor cleaning machine to clean your entire school because you're letting us use your space. It should be that you're excited that we're in your space because we're providing enrichment and academic activities for your students that's going to help them do better in school, not, you know, that's the attitude that really should occur between the school and the 21st century program. But it's okay for you to buy some cleaning supplies within reason. I get, you know, why a school might ask you to clean the desks, like if you're using in classrooms, you know, before you leave each day, please, if you could wipe down the desks, wipe down the counters and things like that, totally understandable. Same thing with a janitorial service. We technically, I think in the federal guidelines, it really kind of, it doesn't specifically say, but it really leans more towards that should be an indirect cost. However, if your school is saying, hey, can you pay for a janitor to stay an extra 2 hours each day to clean up after your 21st century program when you guys leave, that to me is a reasonable cost. As long as you're not paying the full salary of that janitor to work all day long, you know, during hours that are not part of 21st century, then that should be fine. So, so just when you're, and let me talk about that a little bit for materials and supplies. You don't have to be super specific, but if it's a questionable item, then you might want to be a little specific as to what you're spending on those things. So, for example, I had a situation one time when they literally listed that they were spending like $20,000 on materials and supplies, and the only thing they had listed was cleaning supplies. I'm like, why are you spending $20,000 on cleaning supplies with 21st century funds? And it really just, you know, it was just that they included that because they knew it might be something that needed to be approved, but they should have put all the other stuff that they were spending this $20,000 on as well. Not necessarily like super specific, but it should have said stuff like art supplies and paper, pencils, STEAM activities, things like that. You know, you don't have to be like specific down to the exact item that you're purchasing, but you do need to be fairly specific on the types of things that you're going to purchase with that material and supply money. Okay, so again, we've already talked about food, but I even have when accounting checks your when SDE accounting checks your ES2s, one of the things I have them looking for is food, 461 food, and making sure that it is either an enrichment activity or summer or field trip. So please make sure you're putting those details in your descriptions because they may ask you about that. Audio and video equipment falls under 495. And then computer hardware falls under 496. Again, you don't have to use for these last two. I included them because they've been included in these types of handouts in the past, but you really can just put it under 400 through 499 materials and supplies. However, you do need to be specific about 461 food for the reasons why I've already explained. Okay, then you've got object code 600 through 899, other objects. Really the only thing that I can think of that we use this one for is registration fees for professional development. That would fall under 623. So, for example, if you are going to the ACEA conference, if you're sending your teachers, you can pay for the actual ACEA registration under, it would fall under it would fall under 2215 for the function code, and then the object code would be 623 for the registration. However, the travel portion of it would fall under 382 for in-state travel. Okay. Also, let me go ahead and say this really quickly. I mentioned a minute ago that you can use FY25 funds to pay for the ACA conference, but that's only for the registration. Okay. Federal guidelines state that they have different, so federal guidelines have different guidelines as to when something is obligated depending on what that item is. And so for services or for attending a conference, obligation is the date that you write, that you either sign a contract or that you contract for the services. So registering for a conference would fall into that. The date you register is when the funds are obligated. And so you can use FY25 funds for the registration because obligation would fall under, actually, if you register in FY25, then you've met that obligation requirement and you can use FY25 funds to pay for it. Okay. However, travel is different. Travel obligation is the date the travel takes place. Well, the ACA conference is not until November, which is in FY26. And so the travel is not going to take place until FY26. So you'll have to use FY26 funds to pay for your travel reimbursement to your staff if they're going to ACA. Mega, which is next week. Yay, can't wait till it's over. No, I'm just playing. Well, yeah, kind of really. Mega is next week. And so if you guys are going to Mega, then both your registration and your travel expenses would fall under FY25 expenses because you registered in FY25 and your travel took place in FY25. And so that would fall under FY25 expenses. Okay. Okay, our systems accounting manual has 494 as audio video and 495 as computer hardware. Huh. I swear I looked up all these under the state accounting thing, but let me see if I still have it open. Y'all, if you knew how many things I have open on my desk, you would be appalled. Let's see. Accounting manual. Look at that. Okay. So let's look. 495. So this is the state accounting manual. I'm happy to send you guys a copy of this if you want it. So 495 is computer hardware. Yep, you're right. So I actually just wrote it wrong. Okay, and then audio visual is 494. So thank you for catching that. So let me fix this right now. So audio visual is 494 and computer hardware is 495. I definitely can make mistakes. So thank you so much for catching that. Okay. But yeah, if you ever want that accounting manual, I'm happy to send you a copy of it. It's got a lot of stuff in it that would not apply to you guys, but it comes in handy to look up specific things sometimes. Okay, if I gone over everything. All right. And then the last thing was indirect costs. I think we pretty much have already talked about indirect costs, but it's just expenses that are not directly attributed to a specific project, but are necessary for the overall operation of the program. That's the federal definition of indirect cost. And so utilities, phone services, office rent would fall under indirect cost. LEAs have to use the LEA indirect cost rate, and CBOs may use the indirect cost rate of 8% unless they have their own indirect cost rate that is current that they got from the federal government. All right. Okay, so when you're doing your EGAP application, I just wanted to go over a few little details about that, and this is probably the last thing that we'll talk about today. But you should be getting some feedback, if you haven't already, very soon from your ALSDE representatives or specialists about your EGAP applications, and they may ask you to reword some things or do some things differently. So one of the things that we expect you to do in your EGAP application is list all the personnel. You don't have to list like their names, but you just need to list the positions for each person, and like the number of people that fall within that position. So you could say 5 teachers or 8 assistants, teacher assistants, or however many. We don't need specific names. Now, when you do your ES2s and you submit your PARs, you need specific names in that case. But for EGAP, you don't have to put like specific names of people in there. Now, sometimes if you're doing a purchase service or contracted service, you might put the name of that person if they don't work for a company, and that's fine. But this is just really talking about those salaries, the people that would fall under salaries. Okay, so your description, your narrative needs to include the hourly or salary wage identified. So in most cases, you're going to have all of your staff will have an hourly rate, but there may be some circumstances where they are paid with a salary. And most of the times that occurs when they are a staff member of like the central office of that LEA, and they're also working as a 21st century program director. So for example, I think Lindsay, are you in this? I think Lindsay Blevins falls under this. So I think she's the federal programs person and she's the 21st century person. Yes. Okay. So Lindsay, this applies to her. So I'm not sure if she does hers this way or not. I think she does, but they pay a certain portion of her yearly salary out of 21st century. Okay. So 60% of her salary, thank you, Lindsay. 60% of her salary comes out of 21st century, and 40% of her salary comes out of local funds. Okay. I'm sorry, so 5% comes out of her 21st century grant, okay? 5% of her salary comes out of the 21st century grant. So she is a salary employee. So in that case, she is going to say the amount of salary, she just needs to put in the narrative that she's a salary employee, a certain percentage of her salary is paid with 21st century funds. Typically, that salary would be split among the number of sites that she runs as a program director. And so I have an example down here at the bottom that we'll go over in a second that's kind of like that, okay? Also, if you're a salary employee, you should have an MOU in place with the LEA, and that should be uploaded into your EGAP application. So if you're paying your employees an hourly wage, you don't have to have an MOU in place, but if you're paying them a salary wage, then an MOU does need to be in place that explains basically what that salary covers. It should go over basically how many hours they're expected to work for the 21st century program. It should have all those details that we talked about earlier in the MOU, what exactly they're providing to the program, and the overall amount of their salary that's being paid with 21st century funds. Okay, this is new this year, but it applies to all 21st century programs. So please note that a person's salary cannot be split between administrative costs and non-administrative costs. I may ruffle some feathers with this comment, and I'm sorry if I do, but this has been allowed in the past, and in my opinion, it's been a great way for some sites to basically cheat the 30% administrative cap. I may be completely wrong, but that's just where my brain goes when I see it, okay? So basically what happens is they'll say this person is a program director or site coordinator, but they spend a portion of their time teaching students. And so they pay a portion of their salary out of administrative, and they pay a portion of their salary out of the teacher amount. Unfortunately, most of the time, a majority of the person's salary comes out of the teacher instructional funds and not the administrative funds, and it allows them to charge more money for other administrative positions or for indirect costs or things like that. We're not going to continue that. I allowed it this year because it had been done in the past, but I've tried to let everybody know that it will not be allowed in future years. If you're an administrator, then you're going to be paid as an administrator the entire program time, even if you are short-staffed one day and you need to step in the duties of a teacher, well, then that's fine. That's what administrators do. That's what principals do in a school. As an administrator, if a teacher calls in one day and you can't find a sub, and the principal has to step in, or the assistant principal has to step in and teach that class that day, they don't pay him that day out of a different pot of money because he taught a class that day. He still got paid his administrative funding because he's still an administrator during that time. And the same thing should apply to 21st century. If you're an administrator, you're going to be paid as an administrator the entire time. Your entire salary should come out of administrative funds. Okay. It should not be split, saying that only, 20% of your time is spent doing administrative duties and the other 80 is spent doing teaching duties. Number one, that shouldn't be occurring in the first place. I get that some places have a hard time finding teaching staff, but even if that's the case and you are spending a good bit of time having to do some teaching, you still should be paid out of that administrative cap of that administrative funds. Okay. So it may be that some sites need to cut back on the number of administrative positions that they have to stay within the 30% cap, or, not pay people as much or for as many hours, or think about the hours that you're paying people for, So just to let you guys know, for administrative positions, you can pay them for the hours that the program runs, and you can pay for like an hour before that program starts and an hour after. Well, what I tend to see is that the salary every day, they say, and they're working an hour before and an hour after. And that may not really be the case. Are you really coming an hour before every day and staying an hour after every day when the program is over? You may be doing it a couple of days a week, 3 days a week, something like that, but are you really doing it every day? So anyway, just think about that when you're planning out your administrative salaries. Again, your budgets are higher for cohort 26, so hopefully that will help negate, that will help like meet your needs, and keep your administrative positions in that 30% cap. But we will not be allowing you to pay for a portion of an administrator's salary out of instructional funds. Everything needs to come out of that administrative cap. Okay. All right, here's a couple of examples of what we expect your budget narratives to look like for personnel. So this first one here, so let me make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so the first one here, this would be this. So the function code is 6000 through 6999. Object code 10 through 199. Okay, so we know that this is an administrative salaries. One site coordinator at $45 per hour times 15 hours per week times 36 weeks means their overall amount they're going to be paid is $24,300. Okay, but I want to know what their hourly wage is, the number of hours they're going to be paid either per day or per week, times the number of days or weeks, depending on how you want to do it. Okay. Then there's one program director, and I put in parentheses, this person is also the federal programs director. 20% of yearly salary would be paid with 21st century funds at, and I just made up a number, $20,000, MOU attached, divided among 3 sites. And so for this particular site, they're going to pay $6,666.67 of this person's salary. Okay. That's another thing. If you have a program director that is over multiple sites, their salary should be split among those multiple sites. Okay. Something I've seen in this past year since I've been in this position is it's almost like, so every site has a budget, right? Every site has an EGAP application and a budget. And I've seen it where that program director was being paid the same salary for 3 sites for working full time when that program is open. Well, that program director cannot be in 3 different places at one time. So they need to have an overall salary that is determined by the number of hours they're working as a program director and their hourly rate and the number of weeks they're working or the number of days they're working. But then once you figure out what the program director's salary is, it needs to be split among all the different sites that fall underneath that program director. Okay, so I think, we have some sites that have two sites, some subgrantees that have two sites, we have some subgrantees that have 6 sites. Whatever the case may be, that program director's salary needs to be figured out. And typically it still needs to be a part-time salary unless they're serving more than 5 sites. Okay, 5 sites or more, it could be a full-time position. But even if that's the case, even if they're being paid for 40 hours a week, just full-time, those 40 hours, that salary for 40 hours a week needs to be split among those 5 or 6 different sites, which each site is contributing to that program director salary. Okay. Okay, so anyway, back to this. It's divided among 3 sites. So this is the amount that this particular site is paying that program director. There's 2 other sites that are also paying $6,666.67. Okay. Then they also have 1 data entry position at $25 per hour. They're just going to work 5 hours per week for 36 weeks for a total of $4,500. And then I have a total line item cost of $35,466.67 for this particular line item. Next line item falls under function code 9130, is again salaries. So I know this should be a teacher or some sort of instructional staff salary. 1 lead teacher at $40 per hour times 12.5 hours per week times 36 weeks. Their salary is going to be a total of $18,000. And then I've got 5 teachers that are being paid at $35 an hour times 12.5 hours per week times 36 weeks for a total of $15,750 per person. There's 5 of them, so the total amount for teachers would be $78,750. Total line item when you add the lead teacher with the regular teachers would be $96,750. Okay, so this is just an example of what your budget narrative for staffing should look like. Tell me the rate that you're paying them per hour. Tell me the number of hours you're paying them for the number of weeks, and give me what their overall salary should be. Okay, I'm going to go over just a couple more, and then we're going to finish up, answer any questions. Okay, so in EGAP, other expenditures, as I just wanted to point out, I think I mentioned this before when we talked about field trips. Please make sure in your EGAP application that you don't list the venue name that you plan to go to unless you're absolutely certain it's on the approved field trip list. Otherwise, we're going to send it back to you and ask you to change it. So an example of the way this could look is you would put 9130 for your function code, 300 through 399 purchase services for travel, $5,000 budgeted for 2 ALSDE approved field trips, 1 in the fall and 1 in the spring. This would go under the school year. Okay. You have to have your field trips approved by us. And so we don't necessarily need to know where those field trips are going to when we do your EGAP application. We just need you to understand that you need to verbalize that you understand that they have to be ALSDE approved. If you put in there that if you put in your EGAP application that $5,000 is going to go towards you going to Six Flags, then we're going to send it back and say, please take that out, because we don't have your lesson plans to go with that trip. That's an amusement park, which is a big giant no-no. We're not going to approve that in your EGAP application, knowing that there's a very good chance it's not going to be approved unless you have just an amazing, robust lesson plan that goes with it. So it's fine for you to not provide that detail when you're talking about field trips in your EGAP application. Now, if you know absolutely that it's like McWane Science Center course, that's okay. If you want to go ahead and put that in there, put it in there. If it's on the approved field trip list, then that's fine to go ahead and put it in the writing if you want to go ahead and say where you're going. But again, what if you end up changing your mind? What if you end up not going there? Then you're going to have to do a revision later and put where you did end up going. So to me, it's just best for you just to put ALSDE approved field trips and just leave it at that. Materials and supplies, again, I've kind of already mentioned this. Your description does not need to be specific unless you plan to purchase items that are considered capital outlay, which those items are $5,000 or more for one item, or if you're making a purchase over $10,000 from one company, or if you're purchasing food items, then you might want to be a little bit more specific. Also, if you're not sure if an item is allowable, go ahead and put it in your description and we will let you know that this is not allowed. And that it's better for you to do that. It's better for you to go ahead and find out now that the thing that you want to buy is not an allowable expense before you buy it, than to wait, than to not ask permission and then find out later that we can't reimburse you for that item. So I put here, this is one case where it's better to ask permission than forgiveness, okay? Because, you know, with federal funds, if it's not allowable, it's not allowable. We're not going to be able to reimburse you for items that are not allowed. So one way to go ahead and just find out is to put it into your put it into your budget narrative for your materials and supplies. If you're not sure that something's going to be an allowable expense, go ahead and put it in there. And when we're reviewing your EGAP application, we will let you know if that's something that you need to take out and not purchase. So one last thing, an example here, 9130, 400 through 499. It's your object code. Materials and supplies will include art supplies, paper, pens, STEAM and makerspace supplies, drama supplies for $8,000. And then I put purchase of Lou interactive system for $40,000, total line item $48,000. Well, that Lou interactive system, that lets me know as an ALSD person that you're going to make a major purchase. And I can go ahead and let you know right away whether that's okay for you to do or not okay for you to do. So it's good to go ahead and have it in there. All right, so we're going to stop there for today because we are almost out of time and I want you to have time to ask questions if you need to. But let me go ahead and go back up to the beginning slide and post again this QR code. I'm just going to go ahead and put it where we left off. Actually help me remember where I need to stop when I send you these things. Okay, I think we're right here. All right, so what happened? No, I didn't copy the entire slide. That's weird. Huh. All right, well, let me go back up and just show you the original slide. Sorry. So don't forget that you need to go in and sign out by clicking on this QR code again or going to the link. The link is in the chat, the very first thing in the chat. If you scroll up, you can find the link. Make sure you sign out. But while you guys are doing that, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Please review how cohort 26 is reimbursed for MEGA. Okay. So it depends on whether you are going to be new. Okay, so if you're cohort 16 that is getting a cohort 26 grant, you'll treat it just like you normally would with an expense. You already have cohort 16 funds. You'll be reimbursed with ES2s once you submitted that. But you're saying you're new. Okay, so Tara, you're new. So for you new sites who don't currently have a cohort 16 grant, we've talked about this in past trainings, but I'll go ahead and mention it again. So I don't know how far back I need to go, but I feel like, anyway, so in order for us to reimburse you for expenses that occur during FY25, which means expenses that occur from July 1st to September 30th of 2025, we have to get you guys to fill out a new application in EGAP under FY25, okay? That new application is currently being built by the IT people, it's called Link, that work with EGAP. I don't know why it takes them so long to do it because it's really just basically copying and pasting, but that's neither here nor there. They have told us that that new application will be ready before September, okay? When that happens, also there was a link that was sent out to you guys. I don't know if Carla or Melissa can find it, Well, if I can find it, there was a link that was sent out. Let me stop sharing my screen real quick and see if I can find it. There was a link that was sent out a few weeks ago where you were asked to go ahead and think about how much money you would need if you're new, how much money you would need to get you through July 1st through September 30th. And then we would allocate those funds to you in that FY25 EGAP application. So basically, it's just going to be a very short, very simple application where you'll just have basically your program information, just a few questions about your program, and then the budget. It'll be exact the budget, and we'll allocate the funds that you asked for in that budget, and then you just have to go in and budget it out, put what each item is that you're going to spend those funds on, including Mega. So you would go in there and put in 2215, object code 300 through 399, or 600 through 100 through 699, I think is what it is, for your registration. But you'll go ahead and you'll put that into your budget, and then once we approve it, we'll go through, read it, approve it, and then once you approve it, then you can submit an ES2. And so ES2s is one of the next things that we'll talk about. But that's your expenditure report. So when you submit your expenditure report for your expenses, you will include your expenses for Mega, and then you'll be reimbursed. Okay. Okay, yeah. So if you're having to pay out of pocket, I'm so sorry that you're having to do that. And hopefully they'll get us that application done as soon as possible. We used to have a guy that had like a connection with EGAP, that he could do stuff for us quickly, but he left and retired. And so now we're dealing with some people that we don't know as well, and they got a lot of stuff on their plate. And so we're just having to wait in line, I guess, for the application to be created. But they know that there's a time crunch, and they know we need it before September, and they told us that they will have it to us by September. So as soon as that has been made available, we will send it out. We'll allocate those funds to you, and it'll really just be a matter of you going in and budgeting the money to spend out those funds, and then us approving it, and then you can start drawing down the funds. And usually once you start drawing down, it's pretty quick for you to get your reimbursement.
Amanda, do you want the link for the FY25 funding request that goes to that Google form?
Yeah, but I think let me see. Erica may have just posted it.
Yeah, she did. Okay, that's
Yeah,
it.
that's it. So the link, Erica just put it in the chat. So if you have not done that, please make sure that you go in and do that. This link also applies to, sorry, I lost you guys for a second. This link also applies to any Cohort 16 subgrantees who might need additional funds to get them through the first couple of months of their grant. So if you need me to add some funding to your Cohort 16 funds to get you through August and September of the new school year, that you would fill out that form as well. So if you haven't done that, please make sure you go in and do it. I'll be honest with you, I have not had a chance to check those yet, just because I have had so much other things on my plate. But I will try to I'll try to do that for sure this week, so that if I see anything on there that's questionable, I can talk to you about it at Mega next week. Okay. Any other questions? Again, please make sure that you signed both in and out using that QR code or that link. We will have another session today starting at 3. It'll go from 3 to 6, but it'll be the exact same session again. So if you came to this morning session, there's no reason for you to come back again this afternoon, unless you just want to hear me talk again, which I don't know why any of you would want to hear that. But so Mega is next week. If you're not getting Erica's emails, please let us know. Please make sure that you have filled out the Cohort 26 informational survey. but Erica just put her email address in the chat. Please reach out to her and let her know that you're not getting her weekly emails. Those weekly emails have become extremely important because that's really the only way I have to share when something new comes out. Like for example, you being allowed to close your site down for ACA. The only way, we haven't had a meeting for me to share it with everyone, so we share it in those weekly emails. So they're really important for you guys to be reading. Sometimes they do get a little redundant, but just try to at least glance through them and read them in case any new information comes out in those. But one of the emails the reason why I mentioned that weekly email is that we included a list of different sessions that you might want to go to at Mega if you're coming for the whole week. There are some other sessions that apply to after school programming. Now, I will go ahead and say I did go ahead and cancel the new grant informational meeting that I was going to do for cohort 27 until I know more. I just felt like it was better for me to cancel it for now until we know more about the future of 21st century funding, whether there is going to be another grant. So I did cancel those 2 sessions, but the other sessions should still be there. There's some sessions that really apply specifically to 21st century, or not 21st century, but after school programming or summer programming. And then there's some other sessions that I've listed that I feel like would be beneficial for you guys to go to if you have the time to go. But our sessions are on Thursday all day long. You'll spend half the day over at the Hampton Inn with the Easy Report with Erica and her team and Easy Reports, and they're going to show you the Easy Report system and show you how to set up your system. So it's really important for you to go to that because it is kind of confusing. And there will also on Friday, there will be 2 sessions in the morning that Easy Reports will be at, and they're not really specifically sessions. They're really more like technical advisory sessions where you can go and work one-on-one with either the Easy Reports people or Erica and her team to help you have some one-on-one help getting your program set up for the new year. That'll be on Friday. When you're not with Easy Reports, either in the morning or the afternoon, you'll be over in the Montgomery Convention Center with the LSD team. And so the site directors will be in one place in the morning and then come another place in the afternoon. And then the that's site coordinators, and then program directors will be the opposite of that. So, so we'll swap. And everybody will have half a day with the ALSDE team and half a day with the TPI team and Easy Reports. Sorry. And so we really look forward to working with you guys and seeing everyone next week. I hope you all have safe travels. And if any questions come up between now and then, please don't hesitate to reach out. And we'll see you at Mega next week. I'm going to stop the recording.